Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world. I was just looking through the chat and I noticed that we were actually, we've got people joining us from all over. We've got Malta, India, the US, Brazil, and even the UK, which is where I'm based. So welcome, and I hope you're going to enjoy these sessions that we're running this week. We're going to be covering the new beginner's guide to DaVinci Resolve 17. So it's a good opportunity to sort of get used to Resolve and actually learn sort of all of the different areas of it so that you've got some confidence with it. My name's Chris Roberts. As you can probably tell, there's probably a little badge or something down at the bottom of my window somewhere. And I am an editor, and I'm also a DaVinci Resolve master trainer, which means I also go around and not only run end user training, but I also run trainers training as well. So we run the trainer classes. Thanks to the guys at Blackmagic Design for running all of these classes. I mean, ever since the pandemic took off, crikey, 18 months ago now, isn't it? Or it certainly seems like a long time ago. They've really sort of rolled with these online sessions. So it's great that you can join us. I'm also joined by Sherwin and Diego. They are the boys in the back room for me today. They're going to be answering some of your questions. And actually, Diego's not only an English speaker, but he's also a Spanish speaker as well. So hablo español, then Diego can actually answer those questions that you might have. If you do have any questions, and ideally we'd like to try and keep it on topic as much as possible, but if you do have any questions, then what we'd ask you to do is actually use the Q&A window in Zoom. So there's two windows. There's the chat window, and then there's the Q&A window. Use the chat for sort of general hello and sort of, maybe swapping tips and links and things like that. That's great. And it's always great to know where people are from as well, and what sort of experience they've had with Resolve and other systems as well, if you're coming from another system. But use that for sort of general sort of hubbub and chat along the way. But if you do have any specific questions to do with anything that we're doing actually within the class itself, so within the sessions, to do with the course or to do with Resolve, then we'd ask you to use the Q&A window, please. So the Q&A for those official questions, if you've got a particular problem. And I'm sure most of you have been involved in these sessions by now. We actually tend to have quite a lot of people on those sessions. So as you can imagine, it can get quite overwhelming if we get asked lots and lots of questions. So do be patient. If you do have any questions, then Sherwin and Diego will jump in and absolutely answer those questions for you as quick as they can. If there's a particular problem, so for example, maybe my audio drops out or something, thankfully I have checked the Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. Paper ran out of ink earlier. Sorry, the printer ran out of paper and ink earlier. So not that that's going to affect us, but hopefully that's the worst that could happen today. But if anything happens or something like that, if there's a particular problem, then Sherwin or Diego will probably jump in and just give me a shout, and probably scare me as well, because probably have the volume turned up, so I won't be expecting them to jump in. But if we do have a problem, or we'll get little hearts on the screen. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, so that's the sort of the ground rules, if you like. We are going to be running these sessions. They're supposed to last up to 4 hours. So if you could sort of make yourselves available for that. The sessions are running the same time each day for each of your different time zones. We will be starting and ending around about those times. If we can get out earlier, we will get out earlier, but we do have an awful lot to go through, so hopefully you'll bear with us. We will have a break throughout the session, so we'll have around about a 20-minute break, around about halfway through. But again, we'll sort of play that by ear, as you can imagine. Some of you may also be asking whether or not the sessions are being recorded. I believe the session is being recorded, but it's actually used behind the scenes. We're not allowed, for various reasons, to make that available to everybody, I don't believe, unless that's different these days, but certainly a lot of people ask about that. So what we'll try and do is we'll just try and pace things along so that you guys can work through the exercises. But remember, everything that we're going to be doing in this session is all covered in the new Beginner's Guide to DaVinci Resolve book, which is available for free from the Blackmagic website. So we'll get onto that in a few minutes' time. Great. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers most of the ground rules and things for the sessions. You should all be seeing my screen. You are currently seeing my keynote window is open. So I'm just going to run you through a little keynote as to what to expect from the session over the next few days. So as you can see there, we are actually doing the Beginner's Guide to DaVinci Resolve 17. So this is the first of a series of books that have been recently made available on the Blackmagic Design website. As you can see, we've got 5 books. The Beginner's Guide is it covers all bases as much as possible, really, sort of an introduction to each of the different areas to do with Resolve. And then the other 4 books actually allow us to go much more in depth. So as you can see here, we've got the Colorist Guide to DaVinci Resolve, the Editor's Guide, the Fairlight Audio Guide, and the Visual Effects Guide. So all of those are free books that are available from the Blackmagic Design website as PDFs. So you can do searches in them and things like that, very similar to the manual if you've ever delved into the manual at all. We'll put a link in the Q&A there so that you can actually get to them directly. They're all available now, along with all of the media needed for it. So what we're interested in today is we're interested in the first of these guides. So this is the Beginner's Guide to DaVinci Resolve 17. I've just put up the website address there as well, so you can see blackmagicdesign.com/product/DaVinci Resolve/training. And there you can see, if you scroll down the page for that, you'll actually see that there's an area there for the Beginner's Guide, and I've highlighted 3 main areas here on that page. So you can see, first of all, there's the option to download a PDF version. That's the first port of call for this. So download your PDF version, get it on your computer. The next one is up there on the top right, which is actually the lesson files. All of these books actually all come with lesson files. So each of the books has their own media that goes along with this. So you can download and you can then follow along the exercises in the media there. The media is various different sizes depending on the class that you're taking or the book that you're following. In this case, the media is around about 5 gigabytes in size, so 5 GB in size. But once you've downloaded that, you'll get a zip file, and we'll talk about that in a second. So hopefully you've all been sent the links and you've already got those files, or if not, maybe it's already downloading. Finally, the third area that I've highlighted here is actually complete an online exam. So if you've followed through the book, you've followed the class, you feel confident about the subjects that we've been talking about and how the software works, then you can always go on and complete an online exam and earn yourself a certification for DaVinci Resolve 17. In this case, it will be for the Beginner's Guide, but each of the other guides also has their own exam as well with that. So well worth something that you can add to your resume there. The exams are completely free as well. I will be talking a little bit more about the exam towards the end of the session at the end of this week. anyway, so we'll talk more about it then. But there's a direct link to it that you can follow from the DaVinci Resolve training pages there. Okay. All right, so about this course then. Well, first of all, if you've actually downloaded the book and opened it previously, you'll see that actually the book is actually divided into a series of lessons or chapters. There are actually 15 lessons in total. We're going to be delivering this class over the next 5 days, and each day is going to be around about 4 hours. So we're looking around about 20 hours worth of hands-on training here. It is project-based, so you get to take something from the very beginnings all the way through to a finished project. And the great thing about this book is that it covers everything within Resolve in terms of an introduction to editing, color, working with Fairlight and working with Fusion. So we actually are touching every single part of the application. Obviously, within 20 hours, there's only so far we can go in terms of in-depth. What I really like to get out of this class is the fact that, can you feel confident about working with Resolve? Can you open it up? Can you, sort of like kicking the tires, if you like, can you sort of say, you know, oh yeah, I feel confident I can do my next project in Resolve? That's really what we're looking for here from this course. Obviously, the other courses, the editor's guide, the colorist's guide, the Fairlight audio, the visual effects in Fusion, they go far, far beyond the sort of things that we're going to be doing in this class. But we will be doing at least one lesson on every single one of the pages that are available to us in Resolve. So hopefully it's a sort of a good sort of all-encompassing course. If it doesn't necessarily go too in depth in certain areas, but there's more of a scope there to be able to open that up a little bit later on. We are dividing this into 5 sessions, as I've mentioned before. So this just gives us an overview as to what to expect from each of the sessions, really. Mainly, I suppose, so you can kind of bookmark it yourselves and think, actually, I'm interested in such and such a session, possibly less interested in something else. But that said, you know, something like the exam will test you on all of the content from the book anyway, so it's not necessarily one of those things that you can sort of duck in and out of. We will be sort of building things on each of the sessions. So session 1, that's today, we're looking at covering an introduction to Resolve. So that includes this sort of, you know, discussion that we're having at the moment, but we will also be looking at a little bit more information about Resolve so that you can make some informed decisions at least. We will be starting with the edit page quick start lesson from the book. This is actually lesson 2 in your book, which I know sounds a bit strange that we're starting in at lesson 2, but I find that when I teach this, it makes much more sense to do that. So we will be starting with the edit page quick start. We'll be doing a lesson where it actually just sort of, we put together a little edit and we output that very, very quickly. After we've had a break, we'll also be looking at 2 other lessons. First of all, we'll be organizing a new project. So that's using the media page, and we'll also be assembling a rough cut. And we're looking at the editing functions that we have right across the edit page in DaVinci Resolve. Tomorrow, session 2, we'll be looking at moving and refining a timeline. So this is about trimming, for example. We'll be looking at working with transitions and various effects in the edit page. And we'll also be looking at how you can mix your audio in the edit page as well. So that's the first 2 sessions. Session 3 is possibly one of the most popular sessions that we tend to run, which is an introduction to working with the color grading tools on the color page. So we've actually got 3 lessons in this book that we'll look to cover in session 3. So this will be on Wednesday. We'll be looking at primary color correction, secondary corrections, and creating certain looks and working with things like LUTs, for example, and also resolve color management as well. So we'll be having a quick run through that on session 3. Session 4, this is kind of like the first part of this course up until session 3 is kind of the core of what most people want from DaVinci Resolve. But session 4 actually introduces us to some of the probably more intimidating aspects of the software as well. So session 4 here, you'll see we're actually going to be looking at audio mixing, but this time in Fairlight. So we can see what Fairlight offers over and above the working with audio and the edit page. And finally, we'll also be looking at visual effects in Fusion. So make sure you get a good sleep the night before. Bring the coffee along to that one. It's a good session, but it does take a little bit of time just to get your head around things. Finally, session 5 on Friday, we will be wrapping it up by talking about the deliver page, but also about sort of managing your media and working with various databases and projects and things like that, just to make sure that you're preserving your projects moving forward. And finally, we finish up with possibly one of my favorite lessons, and that's high-speed editing in the cut page. The cut page is actually the first lesson that's actually in the book, but when we teach this, tend to leave this till the last part of the class, and really it's just an opportunity just to have a little bit of fun and actually see what the cut page can do over and above something like the edit page as well. So that is the agenda over the next 5 sessions. I mentioned before as well that you will have been invited to download the media. So if you want to follow along with this class, you will have downloaded the media, and what you will have downloaded is around about a 5 GB zip file. Now, the first thing I would ask you to do is, first of all, you need to locate that and actually unzip it and store it on your computer in a location that you know. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes and talk to you about what I've done in terms of the media on my system. So I'm just going to hide my keynote for a second, and you should now be seeing my desktop on my computer. I'm using a Mac, but some of you may be using Windows computers. You may even be using a Linux machine. I honestly don't know, and we'll do our very best to try and help you as much as we can. But hopefully you are familiar with the operation, at least the sort of the basic operation of moving files around on your system. But any problems, please ask us. We'll do our very best to help you out there. When you download a file onto your computer, you've usually got some sort of downloads folder. So that's usually where the file resides when you've downloaded it. So here, down in my system here, I've actually just brought the zip file over, and I've just dropped it onto my desktop here. So this is the zip file. This was actually downloaded earlier today directly from the website. So if you've downloaded this, we've got exactly the same file, just obviously on different machines. So first of all, you just need to unzip that. So here on a Mac, you just simply double click it. On a Windows machine, you will need to extract it, of course, and it will ask you where you want to extract it to, or where you want to unzip the file to. And in this case, I've actually extracted and unzipped it to my desktop as well. So I've got a folder there called R17 Beginner's Guide Lessons. And you'll see there, I've got an information. It says there's 15 items in there. That's the actual 15 lesson folders. So I've unzipped that onto my desktop. And if I just double click that and open it up, I'll just hide the sidebar there because you don't really need to see that. But you can see here, I've actually got those folders, 15 folders for each of the 15 different lessons, one for each of the 15 different lessons. There are different files in some of these folders. So for example, lesson 1, you notice we've got a couple of other folders in there. Lesson 2, we've got a folder and a couple of other files. Lesson 3, we've got video and audio clips. Lesson 4, you'll notice, actually has a text file in there. It says it's blank, This is actually a text file just telling me that this lesson folder is intentionally left empty. The fact that there's a text document in there means it's not empty, is by the by, really, but it just means that there's nothing new for that lesson that we need. And in actual fact, for lesson 4, we actually take the results of what we've done in lesson 3 and we just simply run with it. But a lot of the other projects here, a lot of the other lessons have actually got different sorts of documents in there. So we will slowly work through those as we are going through. But that's what we're going to be working with here. So the best thing to do is just make sure you know where those files are stored. In this case, I've stored mine directly on my desktop. That's because then, first of all, they're easy to find, and second of all, it's easy for me to clean up afterwards. But you might want to store them in another folder, maybe your documents folder. Maybe you want to store them on an external drive or something like that, in which case you're more than welcome to. But just remember where you have put them. Yes, so it's all on you at this stage to just make sure you've got those files, you've unzipped them correctly, and that you have them available to you so you know where they are. Yes, it's always good to give people something to think about just to start with. So those are our lesson files. That's all we need to follow along with this book and this class. So if you haven't downloaded those, you do have an opportunity to download them now, unzip them, store them in a good location, because we're just going to spend a few minutes. We're just going to take a sort of a quick whistle-stop tour through some of the things that's worth being aware about Resolve right from the very beginning, really. So the first part of our class is actually this Resolve overview. So this just gives us a sort of an opportunity to let you know a little bit about DaVinci Resolve, a little bit more about, you know, some of the differences between different versions, for example, and also some of the hardware that's available to us. Because it's not just about working with software, of course, it's also about working with hardware as well. One of the first things that's worth mentioning about DaVinci Resolve is that it provides an end-to-end post-production workflow. And what does that mean? Well, it means that it covers everything from ingesting your media onto set, on set, making sure that all of the footage is correct, organizing the footage in a way that is useful for when you're editing, obviously editing as well, color grading, visual effects, audio mixing, and then finally output as well. So it covers the whole range of the post-production process. In this slide here, you can see that there are a few sort of key phrases, if you like, that people often use when they're talking about DaVinci Resolve. The first one is about professional editing tools. I've been an editor for around about sort of 25 years now, working on broadcast TV shows, all the way down to sort of, you know, corporate videos and that sort of thing. A lot of stuff on the internet, obviously. So you know, a whole broad range of things. I've used all sorts of different systems, right from working with sort of through machine editing systems, working on tape, through things like Avid, Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, worked on some high-end productions, and I'm happy to sort of add my voice to this, that DaVinci Resolve, and DaVinci Resolve 17 specifically, but DaVinci Resolve in general, actually has a wide range of professional editing tools. There's a lot in there that as editors we would need, so it's not just something that's been, you know, it is actually a set of tools that I would happily use, and do happily use when I'm editing. High quality, node-based visual effects compositing. Well, what does that mean? Well, high quality is really what it means. But also a different sort of working with visual effects. You might be familiar with working with layered based systems, for example, something like After Effects, maybe. And in which case, if you've got those layer based systems, then you'll probably be aware that, you know, sometimes it can be a bit difficult and sort of working out where certain things are happening. When you've got a node-based visual effects compositing, it's much easier to kind of break things down and actually understand how things are flowing together. So we will talk about that and the advantage of using nodes over layers, for example. When it comes to color grading, we've got HDR, high dynamic range color grading, built into DaVinci Resolve. So again, you know, you can work to the very highest level. I don't do any HDR work myself personally, so I'm not too worried about that, but I know that it's there and I don't have to use it even though I know that it's there. And finally, in terms of Fairlight, we've got a full recording suite and mixing suite built right next door to your nonlinear editor. So here you've got a full suite for multi-channel audio recording, editing and mixing as well. And one of the things that we'll look at in a second is one of the things that we can do with DaVinci Resolve is we can mix in Dolby Atmos, for example. So that is, you know, sort of as standard within the software. There are two main versions of DaVinci Resolve to talk about. There is the free version and there is the paid version. So the free version is known as DaVinci Resolve, and it is available on Mac, Windows and Linux. So whether you're using a Mac, whether you're using a Windows machine, it's pretty much the same software. Things are in the same place, same effects and that sort of thing. The paid version is DaVinci Resolve Studio. And again, it is available on Mac, Windows and Linux. There are differences between the free version and the paid version. Obviously, the price tag is the main thing, which we'll talk about in a second. But one of the things about this is that the paid version and the free version is perfectly compatible backwards and forwards between each other, which again is a sort of an interesting strategy that the guys at Blackmagic have got, because it means that we can actually start to use the software without having to worry about that financial commitment. And then if we're happy with that, we can then obviously start to pay for all of the different add-ons and things like that. It's one of these things, it's never going to be a cheaper task to actually edit these things, but it means that we can start small and build up. And the fact that you've got the studio version and the free version are perfectly compatible with each other means that, for example, if you're working in a school, you can kit out an entire lab of computers, whether they're Macs, whether they're PCs, whether they're Linux machines, get an entire lab of computers at no additional cost because the software is available for free. But you could have a version of DaVinci Resolve Studio in order to do the sort of the much higher end work. So you can put your resources towards that rather than, you know, trying to buy various different licenses as well. So very, very useful. And it's also worth pointing out that this course is actually designed to be run on the free version of Resolve. So I'm actually running the free version that we'll be doing the exercises in. So that's something worth bearing in mind. If you've got the free version on your system, then again, you will be able to follow along with me as well. If you've got the studio version there's nothing in this course really that's going to require the studio version. But if you've got the studio version, why not use it? So no problem at all there. As I say, these things are perfectly compatible. So you can actually start something on the free version and actually move it to the studio version when you're ready to take advantage of what the studio version offers, which this little sort of table here just gives us a sort of general breakdown as to the sorts of things that we might just be aware of initially between the free version of DaVinci Resolve and the paid version of DaVinci Resolve Studio. I mean, as you can see there, the first is the price. We've got $300 for the studio version, and the free version is, well, it's free, completely free. not hobbled, not time restricted, limited in some respects, but in others, not so much. Output resolution, for example, you're limited to outputting UHD resolution from DaVinci Resolve. Resolve Studio, you can go as high as you need to, supported by the software. Collaborative workflows now available on the free version as well. So this means you can have multiple editors working on the same project at the same time. So you can have someone color grading while somebody carries on editing. HDR color grading is only available in the studio version, so that's not available in the free version. As I say, I don't do that on a regular basis anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. But obviously, if you were, then that would mean that you would need the studio version to take full advantage of that. Visual noise reduction as well, not audio noise reduction, visual noise reduction is only available in the studio version, as is 3D camera tracking and fusion. In terms of effects, we've got some good ones in the free version, some great ones in Studio, but we'll actually take a look at that a little bit more when we get onto that session tomorrow. And finally, I've also mentioned Dolby Atmos. You'll see that that's also only available in the Studio version of Resolve. So it gives you some idea of the differences between the free and the paid for versions of Resolve. I should also mention as well that generally, if you've paid for DaVinci Resolve Studio, you always get the upgrades as well. So when DaVinci Resolve 18 will be released, your license can get transferred across. Well, I shouldn't say that as an absolute definite, but you never know what changes in the future. But previous versions mean that you can transfer your license across. I think the first license I had for DaVinci Resolve was something around about 11 or 12, version 11 or 12, and I haven't needed to buy additional licenses in order to be able to upgrade that since then. The fact that I paid nearly $1,000 for my license and now it's $300, we'll just leave that to one side for the moment, but I've got more than enough value out of it, so I'm very, very happy with that. In terms of hardware, it's not just about the software, as I said. In terms of hardware, if you're doing a lot of color grading or color correction, you may want to look at the various optional grading control panels. We've got the micro panel at around about $1,000 US. We've got the mini panel, which allows a little bit more, you see, with the screens and a few extra buttons and things, for $3,000. And finally, if you're prepared to perhaps make the credit card melt a little bit more, we have the $30,000 advanced panel, which is pretty much like sort of, I don't know, Flying Concorde or something like that. But actually, it's very, very straightforward. Once you get into it, it's very straightforward. It looks intimidating, but it is very straightforward. I've only used them in demo situations, but yeah. If you're an editor, we've actually got a couple of little bits of hardware for you to work with as well. We've got the new speed editor, which is available from the Blackmagic Design website. I still think there's probably a little bit of an offer going on. If you buy a speed editor, you get Resolve Studio for free. I think that might still be going on. So if you haven't got your order in already, get your order in now. Great little tool for working in the cut page. There is actually something in the book, the beginner's guide book, about working with the speed editor as well, although we're not really too worried about it on this class. And you've also got the full-sized editor keyboard, which provides additional functionality than the speed editor just has on its own. For Fairlight, for audio mixing, we've got a couple of new Fairlight controllers as well. So you've got full sort of hands-on audio mixing capabilities with both of those, around about sort of $3,500, $4,500 for that. And of course, we've got the plethora of Blackmagic Design cameras, and there's been some new cameras that have been announced, I think in the last week or so as well. So this slide is probably woefully out of date. But again, Blackmagic cameras have been a staple in movie and TV productions around the world for many years. Also, we've got something called the ATEM switches. So this is for live production workflow as well. So full vision mixing switches. And we've also got something like the ATEM Mini, which will also allow you to stream directly to the internet. So if you're doing, streaming live to YouTube or Zoom or whatever it is, then you can use an ATEM to switch between cameras and sources. And finally, we've also got the capture and monitoring hardware as well, that will allow us to actually output a video directly from DaVinci Resolve to an external monitor as well. So, what a lot of clients like to see is the actual video signal coming out. So whether it's a PCIe card, such as a Decklink, for example, whether it's a Thunderbolt device working with Mac or PCs, then you've got your choice of that. These days, I tend to work with an Ultra Studio 4K Mini personally, so I output my my footage from DaVinci Resolve Studio to an external HD monitor, 4K monitor, I should say. So, but you've got various options for that as well. More information on all of that is on the website anyway, but that just sort of gives you some idea of the sorts of things that sort of surround DaVinci Resolve in terms of the hardware and software side of things. Okay, so we are going to, once we've got that out of the way, we are actually going to work through the beginner's guide to DaVinci Resolve 17. So this is the book, as I mentioned, that is available directly on the website, so you can go and download that now. I will be pointing you in certain parts of the book, pointing you to certain lessons or something like that, that you can always work through yourselves, so you can use it as a reference. Remember, everything that we are doing is all in the book. So we're not doing anything that's not necessarily in the book. So if there's something that doesn't quite chime right with you, by all means, ask the questions. Diego and Sherwin are there to answer those questions. But remember, feel free after the session to go back and just sort of flick through it and just maybe sort of review the exercise. Again, if you're still not happy, then we can spend a bit of time. We can try and answer that for you. So we're going to actually start on the edit page quick start lesson. So if you haven't already, this is the time at which you can start to open Resolve. This is actually lesson 2 in your book. So we'll leave the cut page chapter specifically till later on in the week. So we're going to start by putting together a basic edit in DaVinci Resolve. We're going to start by restoring an archive. We're not going to worry about creating our own project just yet. We're going to start by restoring an archive that's already set up for us and is already ready to go. We're going to look at assembling clips in a timeline using a drag and drop approach. So very manual sort of approach, but something that you might be familiar if you've been using something like Final Cut or Premiere. We'll be working with audio narration, adding music, using the soundtrack. We'll also be looking at how you remove and trim clips in a basic manner in the timeline. But then we'll be looking at some of the other options that we've got, which might not be initially obvious to you when you first open DaVinci Resolve. So first of all, we'll be looking at how you animate photographs. So we'll be doing some panning and zooming using the dynamic zoom controls. We'll also be adding a title to our edit as well, an animated title. And then finally, we'll look at a couple of options that we've got for playing back full screen on the edit page, but also exporting that out so that we can get a self-contained file at the end of it. So that's what we're going to start with today. So I'm going to hide my keynote there. And you'll notice here I've got a shortcut on my desktop for DaVinci Resolve, just so that you can see when I'm launching it. So I'm going to double click that to open it up. If you've got DaVinci Resolve on your Windows machine, you've installed the free version or the studio version, then you'll be able to just launch it using a very similar thing. You'll have a shortcut on your desktop usually. Also, if you're launching from a Mac, you can use Spotlight, Launchpad, go into your applications folder and launch it, for example. And if you're on Linux, I'm sure you can launch it in a similar sort of way. So I have to be honest, I don't tend to use DaVinci Resolve on a Linux system. I did once try and install, I think it's using CentOS, is the version of Linux that DaVinci Resolve supports. Once tried to install that, and I'm not going to go near it again. So I imagine if you've managed to get DaVinci Resolve installed on Linux and it's running, then you're more than capable of being able to launch your application. Okay, so first of all, here I am in the first window that appears in DaVinci Resolve. If you've launched this for the very first time, so perhaps you haven't actually done anything in Resolve at all, apart from install the software, then you may get a little splash screen that pops up that just sort of gives you some, insights into what DaVinci Resolve offers. But once you get past that, this is the first place that you arrive here in DaVinci Resolve. And this is called your project manager. And very similar to something like Avid or Final Cut or Premiere Pro. You actually work with projects, but they're all managed within DaVinci Resolve. They're actually managed within what we call a database. More on that later, so don't worry too much about that now. As you can see here, I've actually got a fresh database. I haven't actually got any projects, although I do have this default untitled project, which you will have in all of your project managers anyway. If you've got some projects already in there that you don't want to disrupt or mess with at all, you can actually just simply create a new folder in your project manager. So you create a new folder, give it a name, something like, Beginner's Guide Training or something like that, and store all of the training projects in that folder. That's probably a sort of good sort of little tip or a good starting point for this. Nevertheless, what I want to do first of all is I want to import something called a DaVinci Resolve archive. Now, a DaVinci Resolve archive isn't just a project. It is actually the media as well. And that's one of the advantages of using an archive, is that you don't need to be worried about media and locations of media. The archive knows where all the media is. So to begin with here, in the project manager here, I am just going to right click in an empty space on the project manager. So not actually on the untitled project itself, but right click in an empty space to bring up this shortcut menu here. And I'm going to choose this fourth option from the top, Restore Project Archive. So Restore Project Archive. And now it's going to ask me, well, where is the project archive? Tell me where it is. Well, I know for a fact that, of course, it's on my desktop. So I'm going to navigate directly to the desktop. There is the folder that I've unzipped earlier. So the R17 Beginner's Guide Lessons folder. And again, if you've put it in another place on your system, then this is where that responsibility has fallen to you. You'll need to navigate to that inside your the window here. I'm going to open that folder so that I see all of my different lessons. And remember, we're on lesson 2 from the official list here. So we're going to go into the folder for lesson 2. And inside there, you'll see there is one file that's grayed out. And this is what we call a DRT file. More on that later. And you've also got this Taryn Jane glass blowing folder. And you see it's actually got an extension. It's got .dra. Well, DRA stands for DaVinci Resolve Archive. So all you need to do is select that folder and then choose Open. And that folder actually contains the video clips and audio clips needed for this project, but also the project file itself. And what happens is that DaVinci Resolve imports that project file and actually automatically relinks the media for me. So we'll have to do a little bit more of a manual operation a little bit later on throughout the class, But for the moment, working with an archive is an easy way in order to be able to make sure that we've got a project and also the media imported there. Just to run over that again, right click in an empty area. So right click in an empty area in your project manager, come down to restore project archive. Navigate to lesson 2 in your lesson files, select the folder, Taryn Jane glass blowing, and then just choose open. I'm not going to do it again because it will actually just ask me to create a copy of that, and I've already got that as a project now. So once we've got the project available to us now, we're just going to simply double click it. Double click it will actually open up the project for us, and DaVinci Resolve actually opens up in the last page that you actually had selected prior to closing it down. Now don't worry if what you've got in front of you is different from what I've got. We will sort that out in a second. But I'll just give people a moment just to make sure that they are all up and running on their version of this project. And you can see along the top there, it says Taryn Jane glass blowing. That's the name of the project that I'm currently working on.
Hey, Chris, can I jump in for a sec?
Yeah, mate.
There are people who've raised their hands. So I just wanted to remind people that we're not going to be checking that. So if you do have a question, please type it in the Q&A, and Diego and I will get to that as soon as we can. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Sherwin. Yes, any questions at all, just pop them into the Q&A. That's the best place to make sure that you're getting attention from these guys, Sherwin and Diego. They do a stunning job answering all the questions that I don't answer. But as you can see, if there is a particular problem, then Sherwin just dives straight in as well. So we're all good. You're in good hands. So that's what we can say. Okay, so hopefully everyone has got Resolve open, and the first thing to point out is right down at the bottom of the interface here. You'll see that we've actually got all of the different pages. These are the different areas of Resolve that we can actually work in. You remember I talked about we're going to look at each of these pages throughout the sessions this week. So you can see at the moment I've got the edit page is currently active in my interface, but you can see we've got media, we've got cut, edit, fusion, color, fairlight, and deliver. And this is what we refer to as the end-to-end post-production workflow, all the way from media import and ingesting and organization, all the way through editing, visual effects, color grading and audio mixing to output for various different formats. So I'm on the edit page. You'll notice that you may be actually in the cut page, for example. So it's very easy to just switch between different pages at any point. You don't have to transfer projects back and forth or anything like that. You just simply open a particular timeline or a particular part of the project inside whichever page you want to work on. So in this case, we're actually just going to go to the edit page for this. So let's click on the edit page button if we're not already looking at the edit page. And we're not worried too much about, making sure that we've got all of the settings right for this project, because by importing an archive, actually a lot of those settings have been set for us. So we don't need to worry about it too much just at the moment. We will look at the settings later on in this session. But just to make sure that we are all literally looking at the same page, if you like, what I would ask you to do is go up to the workspace menu at the top of your interface here. Click on the workspace menu, come down to the option, it's just under the halfway mark here, and it's reset UI layout, reset UI layout. And UI means user interface in this case. So user interface, reset user interface layout. And if you do that, you'll get something that looks roughly what I've got. And that just simply just makes sure that it's sort of like a default setting that you can always come back to. So that's always worth noting, that you can always do that if for any reason your layout looks different from mine. If you are working on a PC, the other thing I can sort of recommend here is that you actually use the full screen window option. In this case, it kind of sort of opens out the interface a little bit more, so the bottom taskbar, for example, it doesn't take up too much space on your machine. So this is what we have. We've got the basic layout that we're actually working to here. So we've reset the user interface. We're working in the edit page. And you'll notice on the left-hand side of the interface, we've actually got a series of video clips and audio clips that are actually available to us. This is called the media pool, just here on the left-hand side. And if I take my mouse and I actually just point at the clip, I'm not actually clicking on anything at the moment. I'm just pointing at things. And at the moment, you'll hear a little bit of an audio scrubbing going on here. So I'm actually going to turn that off. So I'm going to go to the timeline menu, come down here to around about 2/3 of the way down, more like 3/4 of the way down, I would say. And there's an option there for audio scrubbing. You see that there's keyboard shortcuts for a lot of this as well. So audio scrubbing is currently on. So I'm just going to turn that off, just so that yes, that's much better. So silence is golden in this case. Audio scrubbing is useful, but in this case, I don't want it on too much to be distracting from what I'm trying to tell you. So here you can actually see that I can actually just run my mouse across all of these clips here in the media pool, and they actually display in the first of my two viewers. This is called the source viewer, and the source viewer always shows the full length of the video clip from beginning to end, or the audio clip from beginning to end. You might not necessarily use it all, but it displays everything from beginning to end of that clip. So you can see I can actually run my mouse across that really nicely. This is a process that we call live media preview. It's very useful if you actually want to, you're actually looking for a particular clip amongst a whole bunch of things. Along the top of the media pool, there's a few additional controls that we've got. First of all, we've got this slider here, and this allows me to be able to increase the size of those thumbnails. So you can see I can actually increase them to give a bit more room, so I can actually see what that thumbnail is showing me. And here I've actually got 3 different viewing options for the media pool. So by default, we're on this middle one here. Looks like sort of 3 boxes. This is your thumbnail view. That's what we're currently looking at here. And we've also got what we call list view. Now, list view, when we click on that, actually just gives us a list of the clips. To actually open any of these into the source viewer, you don't have the option of being able to do your live media preview. You'd need to just simply double click them, and that will then open the clip up directly into the source viewer. But you're kind of guessing what the actual clip is unless you know the name of the clip. You'll notice that there's a lot more information here about the clips though in list view. This is what we refer to as metadata, information about the files that we're working with, but more on that much later. And the third option that we've got is a new metadata view. And this actually is a sort of like, it's like a hybrid view. I just need to open my media pool a little bit there just to be able to show you this, in that it actually gives me information about the clips, including dates and times and so forth, names of the clips, but also it gives me a thumbnail that I can use in order to be able to live media preview that clip there. So those are the 3 main viewing options. It doesn't really matter which one you choose. I personally quite like the thumbnail view because I find that this is possibly the most useful of the 3 views. Generally, sometimes I switch between them, but generally I tend to start out on the thumbnail view as well. Just resize those just to make best use of my real estate there. You may also notice if you're working on a very small screen, you may also find that a little bit challenging into how you can actually manage different parts of the interface. So I'll try and cover that as we start to get into this a little bit more. Okay. The other thing that you've got if you are in thumbnail view here is you'll notice we've got this little downward facing arrow with a sort of 3 lines to the side. This is called your sort list here. And this allows us to sort the media based on different criteria. So for example here, if I click in this menu here, you'll notice by default, in this case, the clips are being sorted by clip name. So the name of the clip that's within the project, and they're being sorted by ascending order. So each of the clips has a name, 01, 02, 03, and so forth. And then they're being sorted in that order, and you can see the order in which those clips are displayed in the media pool here. We've got 01, 02, 03, 04, and so forth. So they're in the correct order for this. But you can also organize them based on duration, based on the start time code, so the date and time that it was recorded. You've got date created, date modified, date imported, for example. Lots and lots of metadata in there. If you're in list view, you don't have access to that menu. Instead, you'll just simply click on the column headers. So at the moment, this is with the little arrow in the name column, which means that they're being sorted by name there. And in the metadata view, you've actually got a similar sort of column headings here. But in this case, you've got a much more sort of targeted, much more sort of straightforward menu there. But again, I'm just going to go back into thumbnail view there, click in the sort menu, make sure I'm sorting by clip name and ascending order. That just makes sure that they're in the right order for what we need to be able to edit. Okay, so to begin with then, we are going to take a look at this first clip here, 01 warmer. Now you'll notice it's also a JPEG file, a .jpg file. So this is actually a still image. It's not a video clip at all. And it just goes to show that you can use still images as much as you can use video or audio clips inside DaVinci Resolve. The little icon here in thumbnail view also tells me that it's an image as well. But if I double click that, that will open it directly into the source viewer. And here underneath there, I've actually got a scrubbing bar. I can actually scrub through the footage. Now, of course, there's nothing that moves within this because it is a still image, but sometimes you want to use graphics as a good starting point for your edits. So we're actually going to take this, and we're actually going to move this down into the timeline. So I'm just going to take my mouse here. I'm going to click on the clip in the source viewer, in the center of the source viewer. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to drag this down here into my timeline. And you can see as soon as I do that, a set of controls appear. And if I drop that directly into the timeline there, I have now started my edit. So pick him up, drag him into an empty timeline, and just drop him into place there at the very beginning of the timeline. Now you will notice that when I have done that, actually a new item has appeared here in the bottom of my media pool. You'll notice it has a red border around it with a little check mark in the corner. This means it's my current timeline. And by default, it's actually called timeline 1. So I can actually rename that. So if I just click here on the name of that timeline, I can actually call this Taryn Jane Edit. So Taryn Jane Edit. So just click once on the name of that timeline, Taryn Jane Edit. You should be able to click on that if you're in thumbnail view or in list view as well. That's possibly the easiest ways of doing that. But it's very, very easy to see what the timeline is here from this little icon here. But it's called timeline 1 in your media pool. So we rename that just to make sure that we are actually following. We know what we're currently working on. Okay, so this next clip here is 02, and it's an interview with Taryn about being able to create these glass sculptures. And what we're actually looking at here is this is a bunch of footage that we've been given, and we've been asked to edit this into a short 1-minute promo, mainly to go on her website or something like that. So in this case, this is an interview with her here. So I'm going to double click this to open it into the source viewer. If you don't double click it, then one of the dangers there is that you think that you've got this clip open here, even if you've got it selected. But when you move to another clip, you'll see that the live media preview shows you that clip instead of the clip that you're expecting. So always get into the habit of double clicking to open that clip directly into the viewer itself. And here in the bottom, I'm just going to drag this back to the beginning here, this scrubber bar here. You could also use this back to the previous frame here. So go to first frame button here in order to move back to the beginning. And I'm just going to play this. It's a short clip. It's less than 10 seconds long, but I'm just going to play it by clicking the play forward button here.
They call us glass blowers, but really we're heat managers. And we're constantly working to put heat in some places and remove it in others.
So glass blowers are heat managers, putting heat in some places and removing it from others. So a nice succinct little soundbite. So we're actually going to take that whole clip and bring it into the timeline. Now the difference with this clip is it has audio with it as well. So when I take this clip and I click and I drag it down to the timeline here, you'll notice that it comes into the video track for the video one and also the audio track as well. So you can see I've actually got a green audio clip underneath there. And if I bring these two elements together, you'll notice that they will snap. And you can see that those two clips are snapping together. That white line indicates that it's snapping at the end of the previous clip. Let me just drag that back so that you can see a little bit more as to what's actually happening into the clip there, so that my thumbnail wasn't on the way there. So those two clips are snapping next to each other. And that's brought that whole clip into the timeline there. Okay, just before we go any further with this, once we've got those two clips in, one of the important things that we need to know when we're managing an edit is actually being able to change the zoom of the timeline. And we've got a couple of options to choose from that I'm going to show you initially. The first one is this button here. This button is actually what we call the full extent zoom and is very useful for actually showing you the whole timeline. So I'm going to click on that button once and you can actually see how it actually fills my timeline window with the edit. And the other one that we've got here is called your detail zoom button. So you'll notice if I go into full extent zoom here, you'll actually see there's a section of her waveform here and in the middle where she stops speaking. So in this case here, I'm actually going to move this orange playhead here to that area where she stops speaking. And then I can actually hit the zoom, the detail zoom button here. So I'll need to move my mouse over it and click it in order to be able to jump into there to actually see a little bit closer where that gap is. So you see I've got a little bit more control over where I'm actually positioning the playhead into that gap there. So I'm just going to try and find the center of the gap as much as I can. I'm not worried about being too accurate with it. And then I'm going to use the full extent zoom button just to be able to zoom back out as well. You do have custom zoom, and we will get into that a little bit more later on. At this point, what I want to do is just sort of shortcut the process a little bit, to be absolutely honest with you. So rather than bring in each clip one at a time, what we're going to do here is we're going to select clip 4. So I'm going to click once on clip 4, 04 at bench. So click once, and then hold down either the shift key, whether you're on a Mac or a PC. So shift click, clip 14, clip 14, and that will select all of the clips in between. So click 04 and then shift click clip 14 to select all of those clips in between. Just make sure you've got your shift button selected to select all of those clips. And then with all of those clips selected, you'll see mine have all got red outlines around them. Just simply select any one of those selected clips and drag them directly into your timeline and drag it so that the first clip lines up with the position of your playhead here. So I'm dragging it to the video one and I'm dragging it so that it actually snaps to my playhead there. And at this point, I can then let go of my mouse And you can see that what happens is that the timeline automatically zooms out to show me the whole timeline. But what I've also done is overwritten the very end of her interview clip, not the audio, just the video, but the end of the interview clip, and all of the other clips have actually gone into the order in which they are actually sorted in the media pool, not the order in which you selected them, the order in which you sorted them. So it's a little bit of a cheat, to be honest. If only editing was always this easy, I would have been so much happier, but it's not. But nevertheless, this sort of gives you an idea of the sort of, how the edit process is working inside of Resolve. However, you'll notice that although we've got this interview with her, there's all of these clips here. Actually, we need a little bit of an explanation about what she's doing or how the job works or something. And this is where we've got this second interview clip here. So 03 is another interview. So if we double click clip 3, open up the interview. Now, this is a much longer interview clip, and is actually probably much more akin to what you will find when you're working with interviews, is that you've got much more than you will ever need to be able to use. So you need to be able to pick and choose the relevant parts of the interview. So this is what we often refer to as sound bites. Remember, we're trying to create a 1-minute video here. And actually this interview on its own is 1.5 minutes. So that 01:35:16 up in the top left corner of the source viewer tells me the duration of this clip. So I can't just simply use this clip on its own. I need to choose a part of it. And this is a very common thing that we need to do when we're editing. In actual fact, there is a feature in Resolve which, as somebody who edits a lot of interview and a lot of dialogue, it's actually really useful for me. It's actually one of the reasons why I use Resolve so much. If you come up here to this 3-dot menu, just at the top here of the source viewer, if you click that 3-dot menu, this is what we refer to as an options menu here. So we click the 3-dot menu here, and you'll notice there's an option in there to turn off your live media preview. So if your live media preview is getting a little bit, sort of in the way, you can actually turn it off here. But you've also got the option to show your audio waveform here. So to show the zoomed audio waveform or to show the full clip audio waveform. So let me choose the full clip audio waveform first of all. And you can see underneath that video clip there, we've actually got that strip of waveform. That actually shows me where she's speaking and where she's not speaking. You'll see because it's quite long, though, it's actually quite difficult to discern specific parts of the interview. But if we click on this menu again, and we choose instead the zoomed audio waveform here, click on there, you'll actually see, if I scrub through that a little bit more, you actually see you've got much more of a detailed information about where she stops and starts this interview. So I'm looking for a point of the interview, and I know what she says, and I know the bit that I'm actually looking for here. So I'm just going to scrub through. If I just go around about 1/3 of the way into this interview here, and then we just hit play.
At the bench in that time frame. And it's unlike jewelry, it's unlike ceramics or metal fabrication or painting or drawing. You can't just put it down. It has this timeline, it has this limit. Also, you can't touch or...
So that's the bit I want. So round about halfway into this interview. So it's where she says, you can't touch or sculpt. Just give everyone a moment just to have a quick listen to that. But I overshot it myself. So I need to play backwards. So I'm actually going to use this button here to play in reverse. Always strange to hear that, isn't it? And if I hit play again,
limit. Also, you
there, where she says also you, so it's just before the halfway point. If you use my little white indicator, there's a good indicator as to where we're aiming for on this interview here. Now, I'm just going to turn my audio scrubbing back on here, and now I'm going to use this control here. This allows me to jog backwards and forwards. So if I click and drag on this,
also
there, just after that piece of waveform there, she says also, and then there's a gap before she starts the next piece of her interview. Just give everyone a moment, just have a play around with that a little bit. Audio scrubbing is useful to be turned on here.
Hey, Chris, is it possible to show again where they can enable audio scrubbing?
Absolutely. So it's in your timeline menu. And remember, it's about 3/4 of the way down. If there's a check next to it, it's on. If there's a check not next to it, if there isn't a check next to it, that's more like English, then it's turned off. So it's very easy to see whether your audio scrubbing is on or off. If you find you want to turn your audio scrubbing on and off quickly, then it's better to use a keyboard shortcut. And in actual fact, that's probably what I'm going to be doing from now on. So you can see here, if I just bring up my keyboard shortcuts, if I press Shift S here, now my audio scrubbing is off. And Shift S.
also
Now my audio scrubbing is on.
Chris,
Yes,
can you also show how to enable the waveform?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
So if you need to enable the waveform, top of the source viewer, so that is on this part of the interface here, the source viewer, you have your options menu here, your 3-dot menu. You'll see the 3 dots in a lot of places around the interface, but this is specifically for the source viewer. You need to click on that and then choose, in this case, the show zoomed audio waveform is quite useful in this case. The full clip audio waveform can get a little bit confusing if you've got a very long interview or a very long piece of dialogue like we have here. So in this case, I'm using the zoomed audio waveform just to be able to give me a reference as to where I'm actually looking between those pieces of speech or words there. Give everyone a few more moments just to make sure that everyone is keeping up with me. Remember, all of this is in the book. So, you know, if there's something that we've missed, not too sure about, you'll always find it in the book. Okay, so hopefully everyone has found that part of the interview. Let me just jog back and forward again.
also you can't be
There. So just where she says you can't here. So at that point, all of this footage from my current play headers all the way from the beginning, I don't want to use. So in this case, I need to tell Resolve that this is where I want the shot, or this is where I want the interview to start. So in this case, we need to add what we refer to as an in point. So here, there's a button here that I can choose to mark in. So I can click that button to mark the in. You can also go via the mark menu to choose the top option here, mark in. But to be absolutely honest, whenever I'm marking an in point right from the very beginning, I always tell my students, I marks an in point. So the keyboard shortcut on your keyboard, I will mark an in point there. So I'm going to come here to my source viewer and I'm just going to tap I on the keyboard to mark an in point. And you'll notice how the rest of this interview here at the beginning is grayed out now because I don't need to listen to, I don't want to use it. So I'm just going to play this forward now. I'm just going to have a listen for the interview. And I'm listening for a particular sound bite that I actually want to end on, where she says it's a wonderful adrenaline rush. So I'm just going to play this for you.
You can't touch or sculpt the glass with your hands. You have to use a variety of different tools, and glassblowers get pretty creative with what tools that they might even make for themselves or find. But you can't actually touch the material with your hands. So that's a huge challenge. In the decade, more than a decade that I've been blowing glass, I still find it to be a really humbling material. It is very difficult, it has a really steep learning curve, and it's a huge adrenaline rush.
So there you go, a huge adrenaline rush. Now again, this is around about 3/4 of the way through the interview, but I shall give you a moment so that you can play through that interview so that you can actually find that section yourself. So I'll give you a moment to play through. Okay, hopefully that was enough time. 10 seconds more. Trying to judge how long people might need, but yeah, I think by the time I've waffled my way through it, most people will be there. Of course, I could always play this backwards afterwards.
Adrenaline rush.
And then hit the stop button when I'm finished. And I can also use the jog wheel again.
Adrenaline rush.
There. And again, I want to find that point somewhere in that silence, so I'm not losing any of her words or I'm not catching any at the beginning of the next sentence. And because we've added an in point at the start of this, we also need to tell Resolve that we want this to end at this point. So you've guessed it, we've added an in point. We now need to add what we call an out point, in and out, and that's the portion that we're interested in using. Now again, you've got a button here for marking an out point. You can go to the mark menu, you can mark an out point with the second option down, or the keyboard shortcut is O for out. So again, click back here in the source viewer. If I tap O on the keyboard, that will add an out point, and that is the portion that I actually want to use for this next edit. So just give everyone an opportunity to find the out and then to mark the out point. And then I want to bring this clip down to the timeline, but I don't want to use her video for this. I actually just want to use the audio. So in this case, rather than just simply clicking and dragging it all down into the timeline, which will bring sound and picture in, you'll notice I've got a couple of overlays here just above that audio waveform that I've currently got displayed. This is just for picture and this is for audio only. So if you don't want to use the video, then you can just simply drag the audio part of this clip into the timeline. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to drag it here into the timeline. And you'll notice how it will snap to the beginning or the end of each of those different clips that I've currently got in the timeline. If your snapping has been turned off for some reason, for example, you can always turn it on using this magnet button here. This is your snapping here. And the keyboard shortcut N is very useful as well for turning your snapping on and off. But I'm going to click on this button here, this one here, and I'm going to click and drag this down. And I'm going to drop it on that edit point there between 05 glass and 06 first. So those are the names of the clips in the timeline. So I'm going to leave a gap between the first interview and the second interview. Okay. So as you can see, we can now choose the portions of the clips that we want to use. We're not limited to using it all and having to chop it all up in the timeline. That's one way that we could edit. But in this case, we're setting in and out points to choose the portion of the clip that we want before bringing it into the timeline. Every wonderful movie, of course, needs a glorious soundtrack to go along with it, and this video is none the difference. In actual fact, we've actually got a 1 minute soundtrack clip here. It's a .wav, so this is an audio file, and you'll notice it's actually giving me a waveform display rather than a video, because it is just simply an audio clip. If you actually, excuse me, I've turned off my audio scrubbing. Sorry about that for you listening on headphones with the volume turned up. If I move through this, you'll actually notice in the source viewer, I get a slightly different display. If I double click this to open it up into the source, you'll see that the first part of the waveform here actually show me the whole of the waveform of the music clip. And the lower part of it is actually showing me a zoomed in portion. So again, it's following this idea of the two audio waveforms that we have for a video clip as well. So hopefully that makes sense. You can actually use this top waveform here. You can actually move around the clip to choose the portion of the music that you want. But in this case, actually, the music is actually 1 minute long anyway, and that's exactly what we need. So in this case, all we need to do is we don't need to set any in or out points. We're just going to take the whole clip and we are just going to drag it directly to the timeline, but not to the audio 1 track. You see, I'm dragging to there, not to that track. I actually need to drag it below that in the timeline. And this will automatically create audio track 2 for me. Make sure it snaps to the very beginning of that to create an audio track 2. If you are working on a system which has a very small resolution screen, you may find that you're sort of struggling for a little bit of space. So what you can do here is you can actually use this bar, this divider line here above the tools along the top of the timeline there, in order to be able to just drag the timeline up a little bit. You have to sacrifice something, and in this case you have to sacrifice a little bit of the display area of the pictures. You can also use this dividing line between the video and the audio clips in the timeline in order to be able to adjust the position within the timeline. And if you hold down the shift key and you've got one of these mice that has a scroll wheel on or some way of scrolling, if you're working on a trackpad, for example, usually you can use 2 fingers for this as well to do whatever you use to scroll a web page or something. Now, if you hold down the shift key, and just move your mouse over the audio clips and use the scroll, you can actually resize all of those audio clips. And again, you can do the same for the video clips as well. So you can make them a little bit smaller if you need to, in order to be able to fit them into the timeline, because it's getting a little bit more complex now. Okay, if I just move the playhead back here to the beginning here, I'm just going to play a little bit of this music here. I'm just going to hit the play button just here, and this time I'm on the timeline viewer because this is specifically to the timeline here. So I'm just going to play this, and the timeline viewer will show me the edited version of my program.
They call us glass blowers, but really we're heat managers.
And hopefully the same is going to be on your system as well if you were to play that back. The music is fine, but it's a little bit too loud for what we need to be able to hear her interview. So what we need to do here is we just need to attenuate or just lower the audio level of the music. So for this, I'm just going to just expand the audio tracks a little bit here with the scroll button, with the shift. There we go, it's working a bit better now. And if I actually, it's a bit difficult to see this, but if I actually move my mouse, can you see there's a very faint white line running through that clip there, that audio clip. If I move my mouse over it, it turns into this double white arrow. And that's the volume curve, and it enables me to adjust how loud or quiet this audio clip is. So if I just simply move over that white line, it's not the black line, which represents the middle of the clip, middle of the waveform, I should say. It's the white line, it's just a little bit above that. It's not very helpful because the waveform behind it is also white, or sort of quite bright green, I should say, almost white. If I move my mouse over it, you can see that the change will be in the actual cursor of the mouse. That tells me that I've got that clip there. If I click and hold on that, and then I start to bring that down, you'll notice a few things are happening. First of all, the waveform is changing height, but also there's a little tooltip that tells me how much I am reducing this volume by. If I bring this down to around about -15 dB, don't worry about the number. It's not about, finding a particular number in this case. But if I bring that to around about -15 dB, let go of the mouse. Now when I play this back,
They call us glass blowers, but really we're heat managers.
and you can hear that there's a difference in the volume now, and I can clearly hear what she's saying. Okay, again, don't worry too much about the numbers and the specific tasks that we're doing, because we will do it all over again later on anyway. Remember, we've actually got specific lessons where we'll talk more about audio. So this is just getting something that works. But you can see that what we've now got is we've now got a 1-minute soundtrack here. And these clips that we've put in a little bit more, you'll see how they're a little bit now too long for the music. So what we now need to do is we now need to sort of rein those clips back in a little bit. So we need to remove some clips or parts of a clip from the timeline. You'll notice here that we've got it's the penultimate clip. It's clip 13.13. It's the tools clip. I'm just going to move my playhead, clicking this timecode bar along the top to move the playhead, so that it snaps to the beginning of that clip. And then I'm just going to hit my detail zoom button here to to be able to step into that clip a little bit more. So I've got a little bit more accuracy on how I can scrub through or indeed play through that clip. If I actually just play through this clip just to show you. Well, you can see nothing's happening within that clip. And then we're on to the next clip. So let me hit the full extent zoom button here again. So this clip, nothing happens in it at all, really. She grabs hold of some snippers or something, but she doesn't do anything with them. So this whole clip can be removed. It doesn't really add anything to our story. So I'm just going to select that clip by clicking on it once in the timeline. And then I'm just going to press the delete or backspace key on my keyboard. And you can see there, as I do that, I just undo that for a second again. If I select that clip again, hit the backspace key, just so you can see the keyboard shortcuts. So if I hit the backspace key, it doesn't show up as a backspace, that will actually leave a gap. Now we don't want gaps in our edits. So what I can do is take this clip and I can actually drag it back to this point here so that it snaps to the end of the previous clip, closes the gap. Or alternatively, if I click here in the gap to highlight that portion of the timeline and then hit the delete or backspace key again, it will actually close the gap for me. And notice, because I'm in full extent zoom, that it's actually adjusted the zoom of the timeline so that the timeline is displayed fully inside that window. We're still running a little long though. So now we need to just, rather than get rid of whole clips, what we need to do is we probably just need to shorten some of these clips. And the first thing we're going to do is actually take a look at this clip here called Liquid Fin. So this is now the next penultimate clip, if you like, or the new penultimate clip. So Liquid Fin is here. So I'm actually just going to mute my resolve output. You don't need to do this on yours. I'm just going to do it on mine just because it's easier for me to talk over it. But if I just play this as normal, again, you'll see nothing's happening until this sort of blob of hot molten glass is starting to come in, and she's going to model a fin along the top there. So again, I'm just going to scrub back slightly just so that this blob of molten glass is just before it touches the actual fish ornament here. So again, scrub back and forth through there to find that. And again, come here to the timeline, and you'll notice that as I move my mouse left and right across that edit point between those two clips, you'll notice it turns into a trimming icon, one side or the other. So if I come here on this side and click on this side of the clip here to select what we refer to as the incoming side of an edit here, I can now click and drag that. If I keep going, you can see how I can now drag that forward until it snaps to the playhead there. And that then also creates a gap. Again, if you're having a little bit of difficulty with this, let me just undo that. You can always use your detail zoom button here to zoom in. And now you can see that we can do that with a little bit more precision rather than trying to do it at arm's length in order to create that gap. If I come back to my full extent zoom now, you'll see that we have created the gap. Of course, we now know how to get rid of those gaps. So if we click on the gap here, press the delete or backspace key in order to be able to trim that back. For a little extra credit, you can do the same with this following clip here, the finished shot here. So if I just play that through, you can see that there. You see there's not an awful lot of action happening until the fish is brought in. So if I just find that point just as the fish is being put down, trim that, select the gap, can't select it at this zoom, select it in, and then the backspace key in order to be able to remove it. Not necessary if you're happy about what you've done previously, but that's just a little bit of extra credit there. That then pretty much brings the pictures in line with the audio. So there you go, a little bit of trimming just to bring things in. But just to put the finishing touches to this edit, one of the things that we can do is actually, if you think about what we've got at the beginning, we've actually got a still image at the beginning. So let me return the playhead right back to the beginning of my timeline here. And you'll see here we've got this still image, which is actually very boring, to be honest. If I just play that forward, see, nothing's happening. Can't hear the music because, of course, I've got my mute on still, but nothing's happening over a portion of time for that shot. So I actually need to try and make that just a little bit more visually interesting here. So this is the next thing that we're going to do. And what we're going to do here is we're going to animate using something called dynamic zoom. Now, the dynamic zoom is actually available on all clips, not just still images, or it's actually available on video clips. And it enables me to animate the clip without having to add what we refer to as keyframes. Now, don't worry about this because we will go through this again later in another session, and we'll actually build on the idea of this. But in order to access my dynamic zoom, I need to access something called the inspector. So here in the timeline, I'm just going to select this first clip here in the timeline. Just going to click on that. And now I'm going to open the inspector. Now, if like me, you are working on a much reduced monitor, when you open the inspector, your source viewer will be closed. If you're working on a very large monitor and you open the inspector, you may find that the source viewer stays open. But in this case, my source viewer will close. I'll be left with a single viewer. So I'm going to click on the inspector here. And you can see exactly what's just happened. My entire interface has suddenly leapt around. So here in the inspector, this is for the selected clip in the timeline. And you can see here I've got a video tab to the inspector. I've got lots of other tabs as well, but we'll get to that later on. So we've got the video tab here. And if I scroll down here, I am looking for this control here. It's called dynamic zoom. Now, dynamic zoom is off by default. So if I turn it on, now when I play that clip in the timeline, you'll see it moves and it zooms out. I'll stop that, return the player to the beginning, press play again, and it zooms out. So that's what dynamic zoom is doing. It's kind of pushing in and moving out on that clip. So this is what we might call pan scan, this sort of thing, you know, where we're moving around an image. If I click where it says dynamic zoom in the inspector here in that bar, it will actually open up a set of controls. So we've got the ease, how quickly it starts and stops here, and we've also got swap. Now, at the moment, from the beginning of my edit, it's actually zooming out. I always think about zooming out as putting distance between me and my viewer and the subject. So in this case, I'm just going to click swap here, just to be able to swap those around. Now, when I play that again, you'll see I've got to zoom in, and that for me is a bit better as a start of an edit there. So I'm zooming in rather than zooming out. We won't worry too much about the easing just at the minute, but here in linear mode, it means it's going to move at a constant speed all the way through the clip. You can actually change it to ease in and out, for example, just to give it a slower start and a slower end, but it needs to speed up in the middle. But we will talk more about those later on. I am going to leave it set to linear just for the minute. And with that set, I'm just going to close my inspector again so that I get my two viewers side by side once more. I'm going to play that again. Now, when I look at it second time, I actually think, do you know what? That's not too bad, but actually it's going to a point that's not quite off center. If I take a look at the original shot, you'll see that the heaters, the flames are not quite in the middle. So it might be that I actually want to adjust where the clip is zooming into. And the way that I can do that with my dynamic zoom is I need to bring up my on-screen controls. So just make sure that I've still got this clip selected here in the timeline. Make sure your playhead is over it as well. And then from below the timeline viewer, here, you've actually got a set of on-screen controls. Now, if we click in there on this menu, you'll see that one of those is your dynamic zoom. And you're then given a red and a green box. The red box is the end framing and the green box is the start framing. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to adjust the red box here. So I'm just going to click in the corner here for the red box just to activate the end. And then I can actually just drag the corners of that in order to be able to change the size of the framing. Or I can actually drag the whole box around so that I can actually change that. And you'll notice this dotted line in the middle. This is your motion path. It's showing you how the movement is actually happening. If I just scrub back to the beginning and hit the play button again, you'll see that I've got much more, it's zooming in and keeping that much more centered. I'll just play it once more. So you see it's playing, it's keeping it much more centered. If you're happy with the changes that you've made, then you could just simply click again on these on-screen controls and that turns the on-screen controls off, but it keeps their settings. So you're using these just really to be able to customize that dynamic zoom. So again, if you need to, you click in this little drop-down menu here at the bottom of your timeline viewer. You choose dynamic zoom. There are lots of other options here for transforms and crops and markers, and all sorts of things, and we will explore some, but not all of them throughout the class. But if you choose dynamic zoom for the moment, you'll be able to bring up your dynamic zoom controls. You must ensure that dynamic zoom is turned on for the clip first. So make sure your inspector has been opened and you've turned dynamic zoom on. Otherwise, you won't see those controls appear here. So I'm going to click again just to turn them off. Okay, so we've now got an edit that's working. We've got some little visual interest at the beginning, but we might also want to include a title. Most videos at some point, whether it's a broadcast program or a YouTube video, include some sort of text, don't they? So we're going to add a title to our timeline, and we're actually going to add it over the third clip in the timeline here. So I'm just going to move the playhead forward to the second edit point between the second and the third clip here. Just give everyone a moment in case they need to do that, have a play with that dynamic zoom. I noticed, I think Sherwin or Diego was there, just sort of highlighting that on-screen controls box. Yeah. If you've got the inspector open and only got your timeline viewer open, you may find that the box moves over to the far left of the interface rather than actually being where it is on my screen. I've closed the inspector down, so just make sure you've closed the inspector down after enabling dynamic zoom in order to see the on-screen controls in their correct position. But having said that, we're going to move the playhead to the second edit point in our timeline. If your snapping is on, it should be easy enough to find. So this is the shot 04 at bench. And this is where we actually want to add the title over the top of this. And you've got a whole bunch of titles to choose from. We'll spend a little bit more time taking a look at how you create your own text and things like that later on in the class. But for the moment, in order to access all of your different titles that you've got available to you in the edit page, what we're going to do here is we're going to open something called the effects library. So up here in the top bar on the top, we've got the effects library. So these are buttons, these show and hide different parts of the interface. So if we click once on effects library, this then opens up all of your effects libraries down at the bottom. Now, don't worry, we will have a play around with these a little bit more over the next few days. So don't worry, you'll have a chance to play around with them a little bit. But at the moment, we're only interested in titles. But you can see here down the left-hand side of this, you can see that we've got things such as video and audio transitions. We've got generators, we've got effects as well, include blurs and all manner of lighting effects and things like that. But it is titles that we're interested in. So could you select the titles category there? And again, you've got a large number of titles to choose from here. The 6 along the top there, these are sort of basic titles that you may need. So you kind of got lower thirds, you've got scrolling credits. You've also got a standard basic title tool, and you've also got what we call the Text Plus tool. The Text Plus tool is actually a Fusion title creator, so you can actually use that to be able to create very, very interesting titles. But what we're interested in is below that, where we've actually got some Fusion title templates here. And I'm just going to scroll through this, and you've got a lot to choose from here. In actual fact, if you select any of these, just click and drag across them here. It might just take a moment. He's not wanting to do it. Let me see. Is this, if I select the, there we go. If I just select the timeline viewer here, with any of these, you can actually see that I can actually use my live media preview. It may take a moment, depending on how powerful your computer is, but it may take a moment to be able to preview that, depending on what the animation is. But hopefully you can get an idea as to what a lot of these titles are. You can do this with effects and transitions as well. The one that we're interested in here is something called dark box text. Here, it's called dark box text. So if you find that, they're in alphabetical order by default anyway. If we live media preview that there, now you can't really see this, but this is actually a transparent clip, and it's got a dark box behind that sample text there. All right, so I'm going to take that clip and I'm going to drag it all the way to the timeline over the current clip where my playhead is. Notice how it snaps to that as well. Now, nothing appears to be different. This is because that text is actually animated automatically. So I'm just going to use the zoom button there, just scroll along there, just to be able to scrub through this to actually give me a sense as to what that title is actually showing me. There we go. And actually, I just want to find a point there. I need to change the text is the first thing. And a lot of these title templates, you can change all sorts of manner of different titles and different elements of them. And the way you would do that is in the inspector. So I usually select the clip here in the timeline, make sure your playhead is over it, and then open up the inspector once again. And you'll notice this time, it's actually given me the video tab in the inspector, but it's actually said, well, this is a title, so I'm assuming you want to actually edit this title here. So you'll see here, we've actually got the title tab selected here and the name of the title template that we're working with. And in this case, I'm going to highlight the sample text in the box there, and I'm going to type in Taryn Jane Glass, the name of the business. And you'll notice how, as I keep typing that in, you'll see how the size of the title changes as well. The box increases or decreases in size. If I come down here, you'll see that I've got some text controls here. So I've got the font, for example. If I click in the font here, you can actually see that if I just find some fonts that I know that I've got access to here, you can see that you can just hover over the fonts. You don't need to click on them and actually select them, but I can just move over that to find a font that I particularly like. I'll go for that freehand. Let's see what Futura looks like. Let's go with Futura on this. You don't need to change the font. Actually, the Open Sans font is actually pretty unobjectionable, I would have said. But again, you can change between different font styles as well, depending on the font that you choose. So I might go with a medium italic on there. Let's increase the size of that. Don't want to go too big with this because I don't want to lose the title of the sides of the image. Now, if we come down towards the bottom here, you'll notice that we've got a color swatch here, so we can change the actual color of the text. So, for example, if I click in this color box here, open up the color picker, I can actually choose whichever sort of color text that I want. But if I come down a little bit further, you'll see that I've got this line color section here. So the line color are these two sort of brackets at the beginning and end of the box. And I can actually do the same thing here. I can click here and I can change the color to whichever I want here. Or I can also click on this disclosure arrow just on the left-hand side here of the color swatch, and I can actually sort of drag the hue and the brightness and contrast controls here to be able to change the actual color of those as well as the opacity of those. And this is how I often like to adjust the colors of something. You've also got the red, green and blue individual sliders here. So if I wanted something that was a bit yellow rather than the blue that we started with, then I can actually just adjust these sliders here. So I'm just going to go with something that's maybe a bright yellow. Here I'm actually just going to click the eyedropper here for the text. See if I can sample bright yellow. It doesn't allow me to, not there at least. So in this case, let's just go back and just adjust a bright yellow text, something like that. Doesn't matter if it matches it entirely. I've got other ways of changing the color of the text, but we don't want to go too deep just yet. If I just scroll along a little bit more, I can actually just trim the end of this clip here, make it longer so that it lines up with the end of that shot there. And if I just give it a moment, and this red line along the top will slowly turn blue. And this is a process that we call caching. We're caching the effect, and it's just effectively rendering it to your system so that it can play it back in real time. And if I just play that through, move the player back a little bit, and just play that there. Again, no audio for me because I've got the audio is muted, and you can see that I've got a wonderfully animated little title there. So there we have it. We have our first lesson is now almost complete. Just a couple of other things just to tell you about just before we have a short break. First of all, you may want to watch this back full screen. This is particularly useful if you want to watch it back with a client, perhaps, and rather than sort of focus on all of this sort of different interface things and all the rest of it, which looks a little bit intimidating and scary, you just want them to focus on what you're seeing in the timeline viewer, then what you can do is if you go to the workspace menu and you come down to the viewer mode option here, and you can see that you can go into what we call cinema viewer. Oh, and that's because I had my source viewer active, so I don't want that. So I'm going to press escape. My mistake. Select the timeline, and then we can choose the same again, viewer mode, cinema viewer. And here down at the bottom, I've actually got, a bar that you might be, familiar with from things like YouTube, QuickTime Player, and that sort of thing. So that I can scrub back and forward through here. And if I play back,
They call us glass blowers, but really we're heat managers.
I'll let you watch the whole thing. If you want to come out of Cinema Viewer, you can use this button here, which brings this back down, or alternatively, I just press the escape key just to come back out. And just a quick tip from me, there's a keyboard shortcut for that, but if you press P on your keyboard, it will do exactly the same thing. So P on its own brings up your Cinema Viewer, and P again will bring it back down. So you can always watch that back with a client prior to outputting it to make sure they're happy. And I usually, if I'm sitting next to a client, I usually like to show it full screen if I haven't got a separate monitor, so that they can actually see and experience the video as it should be. Finally, you maybe want to output this as well, and actually outputting the video into something that you can share with other people is an ongoing process. You might need to do it, partway through an edit just to show a client a preview of how things are looking or how things are shaping up. You might want to send a director an initial cut of a scene, for example. So in this case, to output this video, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the File menu. And then we come down here, about 2/3 of the way down, we choose Quick Export. Now, you won't necessarily have access to all of the options that you're seeing here. So for example, if you're on a Windows machine, you don't get the option to output to ProRes. But here in this case, we can output to an H.264 file, which is usually more than enough for most people to be able to pass on to somebody else as a preview file. Alternatively, you'll see that there are options here for YouTube, Vimeo, and Twitter. And if I click on any of those here, you can actually see that you can also not only create the appropriate file for that social media site, but you can also publish directly to it. So you'll be able to click Manage Account here, and that will actually take you into a set of preferences where you'll be able to sign in for your social media account and be able to link it to DaVinci Resolve, so that not only can you produce the file, but you will upload it directly to the social media account. But in this case, I'm going to just click on H.264 for this, and I'm going to choose to export it. Choose a location to export it to. I think my desktop would do for this. And then give me the name, make sure I'm happy with the name, Taryn Jane Edit, yes. And I'm going to choose Save. And that will export out my video, depending on the speed of your computer. It might be quite quick, as is the case with mine, or it might just take a few minutes. Once you've done, you can then close that down. And you'll find your video has been exported out. So in this case, I'm just going to hide Resolve, and there's the video that I've just created there as a QuickTime movie file.
Working to put heat in some places and remove it in others.
Well, that's an interesting thing. It seems that the rendering has gone
Working to put heat
slightly wrong on that, so I'll need to explore that a little bit. Hopefully you had more success than me. I'm not entirely sure why that would be. I shall have a play around with that a little bit more. Maybe I should export it again. Excellent. If you have finished that as well, the last thing I can actually show you is we have a finished version of this edit as well. And we have this as what we call a DRT file, which is like, it's a portable timeline document. It's like, so you can use these to be able to import and export between different edit systems, DaVinci Resolve editing system. So it's a good way of sort of swapping information between different people. To actually see this finished edit, this alternate edit, if you like, if you go to the File menu and choose from the top third option, you choose Import Timeline. So choose File, Import Timeline. And then if you navigate to your beginner's guide lessons, open up lesson 2, there is a file in there called Taryn Jane Glassblowing finished.drt. So it's the DRT file, not the DRA. And then choose open, and that will actually import a different version of this edit. As you can see, different color, different font. But this is another version of this edit that was cut using the steps in this lesson. Okay, great. Sherwin, Diego, how are we doing?
Doing good. Some users have reported similar issues with the export using with the quick export. I also have the same issue, so I think we'll have to explore.
Well, I am currently using the very latest version of DaVinci Resolve. If I go to my About DaVinci Resolve, so I am on version 17.2.2. Yeah, if people are experiencing the same problems, then maybe we can try and trace that out. So that's something that we can maybe make people aware of who are responsible for the different builds and so forth. So fingers crossed. It sounds as though it's a consistent problem, which is something that we might need to work around in the short term at least. But good to know if other people are having the same sorts of problems. So yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I hope you found that useful. That was the first lesson from this session, but it's actually the second lesson that's in your book, remember? So what we're going to do is we're going to have a short break. We're going to have a 15-minute break, 15-minute break. I make it 6:05 in the UK, so that's 10:05 in Los Angeles, and you can probably work out your different time zones based on where you are. So let's have 15 minutes, back by 20:00, please. So 6:20 in the UK and the equivalent in your own time zones. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we're just 1 minute shy there, so I think we'll just give it a moment, just to give people back. We did say 20:20, didn't we? So we'll give people a few minutes just to settle back in after they've grabbed their coffee. Yeah. Maybe popped out for a bagel or something. I don't know.
Just letting you know, people have been loving that playlist. DJ Roberts strikes again.
There you go. There you go. Can't beat a bit of the old stuff. Oh no, pressure's on now to keep up the high positive reviews of the playlist. Right, enough of that. Okay, more coming up. But in the meantime, a little bit more of DaVinci Resolve. So the edit page quick start was just that. It just was getting us just sort of in the swing of it. Now let's start to think about how we sort of build on this, but it's given you some idea about how Resolve works. So the next lesson is actually lesson 3 in your book. And this is organizing a new project. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of take the process back a little bit. And what we tried to do in that last lesson was to sort of give you something that was pre-prepared, that you didn't really need to know anything about in order to be able to start work with it. But what we're going to do here is we're going to create a brand new project completely from scratch. Having done that, there are 3 what we're referring to as essential settings, but really these are just 3 things you need to be aware of from the off, really. DaVinci Resolve is a fully professional piece of software, and so it has a lot of settings and a lot of things that you can spend a lot of time looking at preferences about and things like that. But we're just going to give you the highlights about 3 of the most important ones. We're also going to talk about organizing your project a little bit more. So how do we go about doing that? And a traditional way of doing that is actually to create something called bins. This is a system that's been in place pretty much since the advent of nonlinear editing, and actually even before that, when you're actually working with film, where you actually had a physical bin, but it's folders basically. So we're going to look at how you create your own bin, how you create your own folder, and actually move stuff around within your project. We will also be taking a look at working with metadata and how you can actually leverage the metadata itself in order to be able to create some smart bins. And I'll be actually honest with you here, a lot of the work that I tend to do in terms of organizing a project actually goes into smart bins rather than regular bins. So I'm a big fan of smart bins. So we'll look at how you use the automatic smart bins, what the automatic smart bins are, but also being able to create your own custom smart bin for a set of rules to be able to find and group media together. Finally, we'll actually be taking a look at how you can customize the different bin views that you've got and how you can save those as presets. So this is a lesson that is very important, is actually how you actually import and organize your footage prior to starting to edit. We left the project previously with the glassblowing project here. So what we need to do now is we actually need to create a brand new project. Now we can do this a number of ways. I mean, first of all, we could just simply quit Resolve and start again with the project manager. However, if I go to the file menu, you'll notice here, if I just turn on my cursor thing here, you can actually see that we've got an option to create a brand new project here. So we could go to the file menu, create a new project, give the project a name, and away we go. So that's one option. However, another option is actually to go back to the project manager for this as well. So you'll see down here in the same menu, we've also got the option to open the project manager. The keyboard shortcut for this is Shift-1 as well. So we can click on that and open the project manager. So that should look familiar to us. I'm going to show you one more place that you can go to for the project manager. So I'm just going to close him just for the moment. And the other place that you can go to access the project manager is down in the bottom right-hand corner of the interface. There are 2 buttons here. The first of these looks like a little tent, almost like a little teepee or something. That's your project manager. And again, you can click on that and it will open up the same project manager window. Either way, when we get to the project manager, we've got 3 buttons down at the bottom. We've got the close, which will just simply close the project manager down, return us to the current open project. New folder, which we've already touched on in order to be able to group projects together, or to create a brand new project in its own right. So down here at the bottom, we're just going to click on the new project button. This will give us an option to create the new project. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to give this a name, because Untitled Project 1, not really a good idea to call name of a project. So what we're going to do is we're just going to call this My New Project. Now you can call it whatever you want. It really does not matter. But in this case, we're just going to call it My New Project. And then I'm just going to click Create. And then that actually opens that project up, and you'll notice there are no clips in the media pool, and it says My New Project here. If I go back into the project manager, you can actually see there is the new project that I have created, and you'll also see that it's the current open project. If I want to go back to the glass frame project, I would simply just double click it here. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed was that it didn't ask if I wanted to save any changes to the previous project before it closed it and opened up the new project. Some of you may think that that's a little bit strange that it didn't ask us that. Well, the reason for that is that DaVinci Resolve will automatically save changes as you make them. So if for any reason it crashes, it means that you're not going to lose any work, and you can always reopen that project straight back up to the exact point that you were when it crashed. I'll show you where the settings are for that. It's one of our 3 essential settings that we're going to look at anyway. So I'm just going to click the close button, and I'm just going to reset the interface again. So I'm just going to go to the workspace menu here, come down, reset UI layout, just like we did earlier in the session. That just returns us to that default setup. Okay, so before we get too heavily involved in looking at a specific page or something like that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to spend the majority of this lesson actually in the media page. I said that we'll spend at least one lesson on each of these pages. And in this case, lesson 3 in the book is actually concentrating on the media page. So let's go straight to the media page for the moment. So let's click on the media page. And the media page is a good place to do this sort of work. It's designed for importing footage into your project and organizing footage within your project. It's not the only place that you can do this. I mean, you can do a lot of this in the edit page anyway, but having a dedicated environment for sort of organizing and exploring this is actually quite useful. So first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at those 3 essential settings that we talked about earlier. And the 3 essential settings are actually to do with how Resolve is using your system. It's also about the project itself. What are its current settings? You know, how do we know, what we're working to? And also about the auto-saving settings that we've got that we talked about just and the fact that Resolve will automatically save as you're going along. So let's look at those one step at a time. First of all, when you created this project, you weren't asked about any settings. You weren't asked about anything to do with, what frame rate you're working at or anything like that, which is what a lot of systems will often ask you. And that's because it's set based on a series of presets. It's actually a default setting, but you can always go in and change that. So first of all, what we want to do is take a look at some of the project settings that we've got. So if you go to the File menu, and if you come down below the Project Manager in the File menu, you've actually got your project settings. Again, there's a keyboard shortcut for this, Shift 9. So your project settings are there. And if I click on that and open it, you'll actually see this window opens up, and this is your project settings for this current project. And you can see project settings for my new project. I'm going to cancel this because, again, I want to show you another place where you can gain access to your project settings. And it's down here in the bottom right-hand corner of the interface, and it's the cog symbol. It's a little cog, not the TP this time, but the cog. If we click on that, that will also open up the project settings for this current project. Now, as I mentioned previously, there are all sorts of different settings that are available to us in DaVinci Resolve. The main thing to be worried about in this case is to do with your timeline format. DaVinci Resolve is what we refer to a resolution independent nonlinear editor. And what does that mean in English? Well, it means that you can work with all manner of footage. at different resolutions, high resolution, low resolution, different frame rates, for example, and DaVinci Resolve will handle them all in the same sort of way. But what we do is we put them all together into a timeline, and that timeline has to have a setting. It has to have a resolution, it has to have a frame rate, and so forth. And that's what you set here in your project settings in the first section here, master settings, in the timeline format. By default, your timeline resolution is set to 1920 by 1080. So this is the standard for sort of HD delivery for a lot of projects. Depending on your system, you can actually change this. So if I sort of scroll down here, you can see I've got the option to set this to up to Ultra HD resolution. You'll remember this is one of the limitations of the free version of Resolve versus the paid for version of Resolve. So if you've got Resolve Studio installed and you're following along using that, you'll see that you've got many more resolutions that you can choose from here. But in this case, I've got a limited number of options that I can choose for that top out at Ultra HD here. Now, the idea is that I can mix and match resolutions within this timeline. And one of the advantages of working in Resolve is that you can actually work at different resolutions in the timeline depending on the different outputs that you need. And you can actually switch the timelines at any point. That's what we mean by resolution independent. But it's often useful to set your timeline resolution and, more importantly, frame rate to be your output destination. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually going to change the timeline resolution for this project. And the reason we're going to do that is that all the footage that you're working with anyway is 720 HD. It's not 1080, it's 720. So in this case, we can click from this timeline resolution menu here and choose the option 1280 by 720 HD. So it's 720p written after it. So that changes the timeline, the resolution for the timelines within this project, which we don't have any yet, to 1280 by 720. You can always override these settings at any point, by the way. So individual timelines can have different resolutions, different frame rates, all in the same project anyway. But this is useful just to get this set at this point, and then we know what we're working from. The other setting that we've got here is your timeline frame rate as well. And your timeline frame rate, again, is all important. It's about making sure that you're delivering the correct frame rate. The default for this is timeline frame rate is 24 frames a second. And that's fine if that's what you're working in for your frame rate, for your source footage. If for me, for example, I'm working over here in Europe, we don't tend to work at a 24 frames per second frame rate. Instead, we would work at a more usual 25 frames per second. If you were doing things for television in the States, for example, you might be working at 2997 frames per second. But again, this is sort of very much down to the individual where you need to deliver your footage to and what frame rate that it was shot at. In this case, the footage that we're working with is 23976. So one of the things that we're going to get you to do here is to change your timeline frame rate to 23.976. So from that menu option there, just choose 23976. These are all standard frame rates that you'll probably be familiar with from a lot of your setups as well. You'll notice that when we change the timeline frame rate, the playback frame rate has also changed to match. Generally, you want your playback frame rate to match, unless for technical reasons, there's a reason why you need to play it out. Maybe you're playing out to a monitor that uses a different frame rate, for example, doesn't support the actual frame rate of the project. But generally, I found 95% of the time you want your playback frame rate to match your timeline frame rate anyway. So just make sure that your timeline resolution is 720p, your frame rate is 23976, and you can click save. However, I'm actually just going to reset my frame rate to 24 because I want to show you something that will happen if I import footage at one frame rate into a project that's another frame rate. So I'm doing this on purpose here. Otherwise, you change yours to 23976. And then I'm going to click Save. So that's the first thing. The next thing is actually to do with how Resolve is using your system. And the main thing here is that if we take a look here up in the top left-hand corner, we actually have something called media storage. What media storage is it's a window onto your system. It's effectively you looking through Resolve onto your main hard drives of your computer. And you can see here I've got a Macintosh hard drive. I've also got a 2 terabyte hard drive here. And I've also got a default setting here that's actually to my movies folder. And generally, you'll probably see something similar. In Windows, you would see your C drive and you'd see additional drives that you've got attached, as well as that default setting at the top. You can actually set media storage locations in several different ways. I'll show you one way of doing it in a moment, but the main way is if you go to the DaVinci Resolve menu and choose Preferences, so click DaVinci Resolve Preferences. You've got two main types of preferences. The first is System. This is how Resolve is using the system that you're working on. And User. User is how you are using the software. But in the system settings here, you've got something called media storage. And media storage is these main locations that you're currently seeing here in the media storage here. So you'll see it says you've got a different mount point here for the movies folder. Again, for yours, it might be different. There is also the option here, automatically display attached local and network storage locations. So that's why it's actually showing me the two different hard drives that I've got attached to my system here. You'll notice there's a check in that automatically. So that will always show any mounted drives. So if you connect a new drive, it will show up as a media storage location. Now, the important thing here is that you can actually add different storage locations here, but it's always the first media storage location in the above list that will be used to store gallery stills and cache files. So you remember we talked about how Resolve cached the title in the previous project. Well, it needs somewhere to store that on your system. So where is it storing it? And it's storing it here in this default location here, this first one in the list, the movies. This location should be permanently connected to your system. So the idea is that you're not going to disconnect it, and so Resolve won't be able to find it. In which case, he will come up with a dialogue informing you as such. But that is where Resolve is storing all of the files that he needs above and beyond the sort of media files that you'll actually import. So this is often what we would refer to as a scratch disk, for example. You can choose to add different locations. So you can always click to add a location here. You can choose to add a location manually if it's to a network location, for example. So you can always do that, and then they will show up in this list of media storage. I'll show you another way of doing this, though, in a few minutes' time. The third important essential setting is actually in your user preferences. So let's click on the user preferences here. And again, this is to do with how you're using the machine, how you're using Resolve. So there's a lot of sort of personal settings here that you can sort of explore and try out for your different setups. But the main thing I want to show you here is in Project Save and Load. So if we click on this, and this is your save settings here. And you'll notice there are two save settings, one of which is checked by default anyway. And this is something called Live Save. We've probably all encountered that frustrating moment where the computer crashes or freezes, or the software crashes and freezes, and you lose work that you've done. Well, you won't get that in Resolve, provided your Live Save is on. Because what happens then is that everything that you do when you do it is automatically saved into the database for that project. So this means that you shouldn't lose any work at all. And to be absolutely honest with you, I haven't lost any work when Resolve has crashed on me. So Live Save is turned on by default. So that was why it didn't ask us to save the previous project, because it was already saved. It's also a huge bonus, particularly if you are, doing this sort of training remotely. And if somebody crashes, you can just simply open up the software again, select the project that you were working on and carry on working. The alternative option here is actually project backups. And this will effectively create different versions of the project, effectively almost like little sort of snapshot versions based on the settings here. And you can always go back in time, if you like, to a previous setting, providing the project backup remains in place. Your project backups, you can actually choose to save to a specific location. By default, they're using that Scratch location, that movies folder, Resolve Project Backups by default, but you can always override that. So you could store them, for example, on cloud storage like a Dropbox or something like that. So you've got a lot of options for where those backups will be stored to as well. For this, we just need to keep Live Save on. We don't need to turn project backups on. So I'm just going to save those changes, not that I made any changes in that window there. So those are your three main project settings. The first is your actual project settings, making sure that the timeline resolution is set accordingly and the frame rate for the project. Also, your preferences for your media storage location, and also your project save and load options as well. Okay, so yes.
There is one question here interesting. The people are asking, can Live Save and project backups run at the same time? Is there a benefit?
Can you what, sorry, say again?
Yes, if Live Save and project backups can be checked at the same time, and is there a benefit of having both selected?
Yes, yeah, that is a very good question, actually. Thank you. Yes, you can have both of them checked at the same time. So I can have both of those on. And the advantage of that is that as I'm working, it's constantly saving, if you like, saving the project, but saving the changes I make into the project. But every now and then, and you can see here, perform backups every 10 minutes, it will create a separate auto-saved version of that, which will then be in that separate location. So it means that I can always get back into the project that I've been working on without losing any work. But also it means that I can step back in time and I can choose to load an earlier version of that project. So think of this as maybe like versioning as well. Sometimes I want to open a project. I want to mess around with things. I want to try things out without committing them to saving, without committing myself to saving that project. So in that case, I would work with Live Save off. That's kind of like working without a safety net. If you know what you're doing, you're fine. If you're willing to accept that occasionally the software will crash and you might have to rebuild some work, but you've always then got the option of opening up your project backups. So you can have these two things working together. You can have them working individually, or you can have one working and not the other. So it just depends whether or not you want to work with a constant save without the project backups. You just want to work without the project backups, without the constant save. So it becomes a sort of what you prefer to do, really. To be honest, my recommendation, if you're new to this, is always work with Live Save on. It's turned on by default for a reason. So always work with Live Save on. And if you want the option of being able to go back to an earlier version of your project for some reason, then turn your project backups on as well. But for the purposes of this training, we should be okay with just Live Save. So hopefully that's answered the question there.
Hey, Chris, just to add to that, Live Save, the autosave doesn't actually start until you manually save.
Correct. Yes. So yeah, that is one other thing as well. If you are creating a new project using the untitled project as a start, just make sure you manually save that before, and then it will actually start to live save for you. Thank you very much. I always forget to mention that one, Sherwin. He's picked me up on it a couple of times, but this is why we've got these guys behind the scenes. They are listening. So excellent. Thank you very much. Great. So so we have a project, we have this set up. What we need to do first of all is we need to import some footage into this project. So once we've got the footage on the system, this is the best place to import it, is actually in the media page. But we need to be able to find that. So this is where the media storage location comes in. Now, the footage that we're interested in is actually in the lesson 3 folder on our lesson files that we downloaded earlier. So we could go and manually find them in the system. So here, for example, I would click on my Macintosh HD or my C drive if I'm on Windows, go into users, the user that I'm currently logged in as, and then on my desktop, and then in the beginner's guide, and then in lesson. Yes, I am finally there. That is one way of doing it. Let me just close that back up again. Another way of doing it is we can actually open the media location here in the media storage. So that's my preferred way of doing this. So if you just simply right click in the media storage location, you can choose to add a new location. Right click in an empty space in the media storage in the media page, choose add new location. And now you've got a very friendly window, a very, very friendly system window. So in this case, if I navigate to my desktop, select my beginner's guide lessons, and then choose open, you can see now that has actually added that as a location, a media storage location. So now we can select that, double click lesson 3, and we're ready for our importing. So I'll just do that very quickly one more time, just in case somebody needed a quick refresher there. Right click in an empty area of your media storage, choose add new location. Navigate to wherever you had your beginner's lesson files, select that folder and then choose open. Now, I'm not going to do it again because it will actually tell me it's already got that as a media storage location. So I was just running through it for people there. And just to show you what's going on behind the scenes here as well, if I go back into my preferences, system media storage, you'll actually see that it's actually added that as a media storage location. If I want to remove that, then I can do so from here. So I can select that, hit remove, and it would remove it from my media storage, but I want it to be there for the moment. So once again, I'm going to select that media storage location, select lesson 3, and I have 2 folders in there. First is an audio folder, and the second is a video clips folder. If we access the video clips folder, you'll see that we've got a series of video clips. We've got a couple of interviews, and we've also got a series of footage for different airplanes, different styles, airplanes, different locations. There's some wonderful footage in here, actually. This is all from a documentary called Age of Airplanes. And what we're doing here is we've got a small selection that's been given to us from the documentary maker. And we just want to put together a small little trailer for this documentary to give a taste of what people can expect. So sort of very similar in sort of idea from the previous project that we were working on. You can see that I can live media preview these files. I turn my audio scrubbing off, remember, Shift S to turn off your audio scrubbing. But you can see that I can live preview these files. I can also select them, and I can also then play them backwards and forwards, pause them, jog backwards and forwards through that using the viewer controls, just as we were doing in the previous lesson. So hopefully this is not too much of a departure from what we were doing previously. I can adjust the size of these. I can also go into list view versus thumbnail view, for example, change the order of them, just like I can do in the media pool. In order to import these clips, there's a very simple instruction. It says add clips from media storage to get started. So all we do here is just make sure that we select all of those video clips that are in that current folder there. And with them selected, all I need to do is click, drag and drop them into this part of the interface here, the media page. Sorry, the media pool. Now, if you followed the instructions that we've done so far, you won't get this warning. Remember, one of the things we did was just check the timeline format, the resolution and the frame rate. And I asked you to change the frame rate to 23.976, which is what all of this footage is. But you'll see it says the selected clips have a different frame rate to the project, because remember, I didn't change mine from 24. Well, I did, and then I changed it back again. Would you like to change your timeline frame rate to match? You can't undo this action. So I know that I need it to match, because otherwise I'll get strange problems with the playback there. So I need to choose change. It actually adds the footage to the timeline, actually adds the footage to the media pool, no problem. But if I go back into my project settings, now here you can see that my timeline frame rate has actually changed. So in that case now, my timeline frame rate is the same as the source clips that have been brought in. So that's just a sort of a belt and braces sort of safety precaution. If you know that the frame rates of those clips differs from your project and your project is set to the correct frame rate, then you obviously wouldn't do that as a general way of working. However, once we've dragged the clips into the media pool, those clips are ready for us to edit. When you import clips like this, Resolve doesn't change those files at all. It doesn't move or copy them at all. What it does is it uses the original source media in the original location that you've imported it from, and it's actually just simply linking to those clips. So wherever you put them on your system, that's where you've imported them from. So it's always important to make sure, particularly if you've been given the footage, to make sure that it's on an appropriate drive. Usually on edit systems, we would have a separate media drive, very fast, very large media drive that we would import from. In this case, we're working from the desktop, so yeah, it's fine for this training, but on a large project where you may have terabytes and terabytes of footage, you don't want to store it on the desktop ideally. Let's just go back to the lesson 3 folder here. So a couple of ways to do this. We can just simply click here in the media storage to go back to lesson 3, or alternatively, we've got little forward and backward arrows here. So very much like a browser in this case. So I can just back up one level just to here to the so I'm looking at the audio and the video clips folder. Now, one of the advantages of importing like this is if you've got all of your footage and all of your media organized, you might have put it into different folders. What we can actually do is preserve that folder structure when we import. And we do that by creating something called bins. And bins are just a fancy way that video editors often refer to folders. It's just so happens to be what we call them in video editing. We call folders bins. There you go. It's just one of those sort of historical quirks. So to do that, in this case, if I right-click the audio folder, and you can see that I can actually I've got 3 import options here. I can choose to add the folder to the media pool. And what that will do is I'll actually just look inside that folder. And if it finds any files that it can work with, then it will import them directly into the media pool. Add folder and subfolders into the media pool. So what will happen is it will actually look inside the folder and any subsequent folders that happen to be there. So this is a good option if you're dealing with camera media, which can be very complex in the way that it's arranged. And then the other option is add folder and subfolders into media pool, create bins. This is useful if you've got footage already pre-organized for you and you just want to preserve that organization. So in this case, that's the option that we're going to choose here. Add folder and subfolders into media pool, create bins. And in this case, you can see here in the media pool, in the bin list at the side, we've got a new bin, and this is called audio. I can select the master bin, and that will actually show me all of the footage contained at that level. And then inside there, any subsequent bins show up as, surprise, surprise, folders. And you can access those by just simply clicking on the bin list here. You can also change their names if you highlight the name, or alternatively, you can double click to open up the bin in the media pool. And then, surprise, surprise, you've also got a little backward arrow there just to bring you back up one level. However, usually, not always, but usually, you also want to create your own bins for your own organization. So here, for example, I've got this clip here. It's a clip 11.11 movie credits. And again, if I just preview this, you can actually see that this is a set of credits. It's a video clip that's been rendered out, a set of credits, obviously, for this this trailer. So we need to probably put that somewhere safe. We know where it is. So we can create our own bins. So in this case, we could go to the File menu and choose New Bin. We've got a keyboard shortcut as always for this, so Shift Command N or Shift Control N if you're on a PC or Linux. Alternatively, you can just simply right click here in this bin list and create a new bin using the same keyboard shortcuts as well, but also using this shortcut menu here. So if I create that new bin, I'm going to call this bin ending credits. So just type in the name for the bin. If you make a spelling mistake, you can always just highlight the bin and click on the name again so that you can always go in and change that as well. And then in order to move a clip or a piece of media from one bin to another, you can just simply select the clip here in the media pool, either drag it to the bin here that looks like a folder, or just drag it to the bin list here and then just drop it onto there, and then it will actually move that directly into that bin. Okay, just whilst we're here and we're talking about bins as well, some people think of the bins can be quite limiting, and actually in certain other systems that I've used, they can be quite limiting. However, you can actually do a couple of things in Resolve that are quite neat. First of all, if you right click on a bin, you can choose the option to, if you can find it, open as new window. So right click on a bin and choose open as new window, and this will actually open a new instance of the media pool here. So you can actually move this around, and if you had two monitors side by side, for example, you can move it onto a separate monitor so that you can use that additional real estate there. So if you are in the habit of wanting to open the bins as their own separate floating windows, then you can do here. Also, if you command or control click multiple bins, you can actually select and view the contents of those bins together in the same media pool window. So you can see here I'm actually viewing the end credits and the audio next to each other, but I'm not seeing the video clips as well. And again, this is useful. I mean, try doing this in some of the other systems that I've worked on before. It's not as easy as it sounds. So it's useful to be able to see content across multiple bins at the same time. That said, there are a couple of other things that we can do in terms of organization. The first is actually going back to the master bin here. And let's just make these thumbnails a little bit bigger so that we can actually really see this. There we go. So there are a number of clips here that the thumbnail is useful to see. So for example, these clips here, we can clearly see are interviews very clearly. But the thumbnail by default only shows us the first frame of the clip. It doesn't necessarily mean that the first frame is indicative of what that clip actually is. So if we are using the thumbnails as a reference, sometimes it's useful to be able to adjust the thumbnail so that we've got something that's more indicative of the actual shot itself. And this is really quite straightforward to do. For example, if I take a look at this first shot here, St. Martin Landing, yes. So if I use my live media preview, you can see that that is probably a bit more of a representative shot than the first frame here. So if I just find a frame that I quite like, if I right click on the clip, I can then choose this option here, set poster frame, Command or Control P if you're on a PC. So if I click on that now, if I click away, you'll see that it does not change that poster frame. So I can still live media preview that, and it should, he says, update the thumbnail, and it doesn't appear to have done. So let me just try once more. Set poster frame. There we go. There we go. And again, you can do this on a number of these shots. So for example, the jet landing is another one. Here, the water takeoff is another one. If I just press Command P on that, that will update that poster frame there. And again, the Maldives shot here is another good one for that. So you can see how easy it is to just update those poster frames based on the shot that you're actually using when you're reviewing the shot. This will also work in the metadata view that we talked about earlier. So when you've got a thumbnail here, you can always update that in the metadata view. However, of course, the list view doesn't have thumbnails. So in that case, it won't, it's irrelevant for that list view. Okay, so that's your poster frame. What else can we do? Well, as well as using things like poster frames, and you know, we can change the names of clips as well. For example, I can highlight a clip and I can change its name. That's one way of doing it. But something else that we can do, which is actually very, very underrated, is actually add metadata. Now, it may sound quite scary, this process, but actually it's very straightforward. All metadata is just information that you can then use to your advantage. So information about a file or information about a clip that you can then use to your advantage. And one way of sort of thinking about metadata is when I first started working in video production, we would shoot everything on tape. So one of the things that we would then do is once we'd shot on a tape, we would take the tape out of the camera and we would write on the tape what the footage was on that camera tape. It might sound silly, but actually that's metadata. That then is something that we can then look at and go, oh, those are the shots that we need. And we would spin through the tape and find the shots. So it's sort of similar to that. I'm going to show you how you can actually add metadata, and there are a number of ways that you can do this. But the main way is down here in the bottom right-hand corner. We actually have a metadata panel, a dedicated metadata panel. And if I select one of these interviews here, if I select this, in the metadata, it actually shows me information about that clip. So it shows me the name of the clip. It shows me the location where the original source media for that clip happens to be. It shows me codecs, shows me a number of audio channels and sample rates, frame rates, and so forth. So there's a lot more information in there, though. For example, I can come down here and I've got information about start and end timecode values, the date that this file was last modified, for example. Lots of other things, field dominance, there's another one, number of individual frames there are within the clip. If I come here though and click on this sort menu option here at the top of the metadata panel, clicking, you'll see that I'm currently looking at a group of metadata called clip details. If you choose all groups from that, that will actually list all of the metadata that you can possibly see within this clip. There's a lot in here. Don't worry about that just at the moment. However, if you click back in that sort menu again and choose shot and scene, this gives you a much more narrower view of this, and you can change things. You can add descriptions, for example. You can change the clip color. You can also add certain things like shot and scene, take angle, for example, shot type. So there's a lot of things in here that are actually quite useful to us that we can actually add as information, because all of this ultimately then becomes useful to us. One of the ones that's useful here, one of the fields, is something called a keyword. You may use keywords in other systems, and for example, if you sort of go and browse something on YouTube, you're looking for a particular video on a particular subject, it's often useful if that video has been keyworded by the creator so that you can find it easily. So that's pretty much how we're using keywords here. We use them to search, we use them to find, we use them to tag the media. So in this case, if I select that keywords box there, and I'm just going to type in INT here, and you can see it actually brings up all sorts of different keywords that are already there. So int could stand for interior, for example. It could stand for interlaced, but in this case it stands for interview. So I'm just going to click on the interview keyword there, and it's actually added that keyword to that clip. We've got two more interviews, so I'm going to click and use the command key to select both of those together. And here, if I go to the keywords field again and do the same again, INT, for example, and then choose interview, and then that adds that as another keyword to those interview clips. Just a slight quirk here, just something to be aware of, is if you add something like this, a keyword or metadata, to a single file, it will automatically update that clip within this project. It's not adding that for anything beyond this project. If you've got multiple clips, as I currently have, you don't actually add them automatically unless you click the save button down at the bottom. However, if you do forget about this, and I forget about this all the time, and you just click away, Resolve will actually remind you saying, well, hang on a second, do you want to keep that keyword change? So in this case, I can choose to either apply or discard the changes. But in this case, I'm going to choose apply. Okay, so we've added a keyword to those 3 interview clips. You might be asking yourself, why are we doing this? Well, remember, it's all about being able to search and retrieve that information. And one of the interesting things is that, that by just simply adding keywords, Resolve is actually doing an awful lot of the pre-organization for us, if you like. In actual fact, this is where we can turn our attention to something called smart bins. And smart bins are exactly what they sound like. A bin is a regular dumb bin. Sounds like a swear word, doesn't it? But it's a regular dumb bin. It doesn't know what's in it. It just simply is a dumping ground where you store things. A smart bin is much more intelligent, and it actually allows you to group clips right across your project based on a series of rules or parameters. And here in the smart bins, you've got a set of smart bins automatically based on any keywords that you add to these clips. So if I select that and then just twirl that open there, you'll notice there is an interview keyword smart bin already there. And that has all of those interview clips on it. Anything that's tagged with the words interview will automatically find its way into this smart bin. So you can actually run through the footage very quickly, and you could tag it, and then very, very quickly you can actually bring up those smart bins directly here based on the individual keywords that happen to be on those clips. But you can also add multiple keywords. So for example, I know that this guy is actually called Brian. So if I select one of those clips, come to my keywords, I can type in the word Brian. Now, it's not part of the standard database of keywords here, but I can now add that. And now I've got a Brian keyword bin here, so I can select that. And now it's just showing me any clips that have the keyword Brian. And just to show you, if I go and select another clip and then type in Brian here, that then automatically shows up into that smart bin. Hopefully you can all see how useful this is. And I will be honest with you and say that I do a lot of my organization based on smart bins. I do sort of like, footage in bins based on, shooting dates or subject or something like that. But for the actual detail work of organization, then what I actually use is I actually use smart bins. There are a series of smart bins that you can bring up. If you go to your DaVinci Resolve menu, under Preferences, go to User, and then Editing, and you'll see that there is an option here for automatic smart bins. By default, only one is checked, and that is for keywords. But you've also got smart bins for people metadata. That's more of a studio function. You've also got smart bins for shot or scene metadata, as well as a smart bin just for timelines. We'll create timelines in a little while. But if I just save those settings there, and we take a look in the metadata here, you'll notice we've got shot and scene. So I can actually put in a shot number, I could put in a scene number, or I could use scenes almost like keywords really. So it's scene one or interview with Brian or whatever. And then I can bring those automatically up. And you don't need any more knowledge other than to know how to add metadata to those clips within this project. But rather than just rely on Resolve's automatic smart bins, the real power of a smart bin is knowing that you can create your own. So, for example, what we might want to do is we've got some basic organization going on in this project. So here we've got all of this footage here that's been categorized in some ways. We've got an interview, we've got ending credits, we've got audio in the bins. But really what we want to do is we just want to be able to create a smart bin just for all of the B-roll footage together. So let's do that. And smart bins are created based on a set of rules, but it's not just one rule, you can have multiple rules. So in this case, if you just simply right click in the smart bin area of the media pool bin list and choose add smart bin. So right click in an empty area of the smart bin list in the media pool, choose add smart bin. First of all, this window will open up and I can actually just rename this smart bin. So we're just going to call this B-roll. B-roll. And then underneath that, this is where we set the rules. And you can choose to match all of the rules. You can choose to match any of the rules. And there's actually quite complex ways in which you can sort of mix and match between various different rules. So first of all, let's take a look at this. It says media pool properties. So that's actually the best thing to start with, because media pool properties is pretty much any metadata attached to this clip. So media pool properties file name contains, and then whatever you want. Well, that's the actual name of the source media file, the file name on disk. It's not what we're interested in here. We're interested in excluding all of the interview clips. So in this case, we want media pool properties. We want to change the file name to keyword. So if we click here, now we can scroll through this list, but it's not in alphabetical order. So here's a quick tip for you. In this list here, if I tap K on my keyboard, it will take me down to the next field that starts with the letter K. If I tap it again, it will take me to the next K field, and so on and so forth until it runs out, and then it takes me back to the original. So here, just tap K so that keywords is highlighted, then click on it with your mouse. And that's a quick way of being able to set keywords. So keywords, now in this case, we don't want a keyword. If we've got a keyword, we don't want it. So in this case, we choose does not contain. So media pool properties, keyword does not contain, you've got it, interview. And you can see the result of that immediately in the media pool window. But you'll notice that we've got a few other clips in there, most notably audio. So in this case, we're going to click on the plus here on the right-hand side. This adds a second rule. So in this case, we want to choose media pool properties. Clip type is what we want. So we're going to just tap C till we get to clip type. Is not audio. And again, it's remove the audio from this smart bin. However, we still have our movie credits in there. So we've got all of this B-roll footage here, which is right, but the movie credits there, because the movie credit doesn't have the interview keyword on. It's not an interview. And also, it's not just audio, because obviously it's video and actually doesn't have any audio. So it's irrelevant. So how might we exclude that? You could add a keyword to that clip called credits. You could then choose from this bin list to be able to ignore that from this smart bin. In actual fact, it's actually got the word credits in the name. So in this case, if I choose to add another option here, so we choose media pool properties, and I'm going to go for clip name does not contain credits. And again, it's now disappeared from this smart bin. I'm going to do one more thing as well, which is just an anticipation of what we ultimately do in the next lesson. So here I'm just going to choose to add another rule, media pool properties, and we choose clip type is not timeline. So ultimately we're going to create a timeline for this project, and I don't want this timeline to go into this smart bin, which is what it would do automatically, unless I choose to exclude it from that. So that's just something else to think about in terms of the rules. Not important in this case, but when you've got a very complex project, it can, you want to be quite careful. There's, no intended overlap, no unintended overlap between those different rules. Once we've got the rules set up, we can just choose create, and that will create our B-roll smart bin. So you can see that we've now got our interviews in our interview keyword smart bin, and we've also got a B-roll in our custom smart bin. Finally, in this little exercise for this lesson, the other thing that's useful to know is that you can actually customize your bin views as well. This is most notable if you actually customize the list view. So I'm just going to select the B-roll smart bin just as an example here. I'm going to go into list view. And here you can see that we've got a huge sort of number of different pieces of metadata. And again, this is information that you can use in order to be able to try and group the footage together to create smart bins. You can do it based on frames per second, for example, or resolution. So you can actually find clips that are not just 1280 by 720, for example. So you've got something that's slightly out of the ordinary within your project. This is a good way of being able to isolate them using smart bins. However, you can customize these column headings as well. So there might be a lot of information in there that you don't need. You don't really necessarily need to know the file path. You don't really necessarily need to know the individual frames that are actually in these clips. Duration might be useful, but not necessarily the individual frames, unless you're a visual effects artist maybe. But you can do this by just simply right-clicking on any of the column headers. So you need to click on the top of the columns here, and then you can choose from any of these fields that are checked or unchecked. Anything that's checked is available in this list view. Anything that's unchecked is not available but can be turned on. So for example, here, we don't necessarily need to know date added. We also talked about the number of frames. So the number of frames per second is useful. For example, flags and file path not important. I'll just keep that for the moment. You'll notice that there is a field called keyword. So I can actually show the keywords in list view. So here we go. So there's my keyword, there's my Brian keyword there. I can actually add keywords here as well to individual clips just by clicking on the keyword field, and I can just type them in here. So I don't always need to use the metadata. And you can also drag these around so that you can change the order of these clips as well. So sorry, the order of these columns as well. The only one that you can't change is the clip name. That stays at the beginning of that column list there. If you have customized your column list, you can also then right click on there and you can choose to create a custom column layout. So it's easy for you to simply call back up at a later date as well if you need to save that column layout. But other than that, that's how you can go through and you can organize and you can create some order to the chaos that is ultimately going to threaten to swamp your projects at any point in time. So yeah, so hopefully that's all useful information.
Hey, Chris, if we have time, could you show the going into list view and the custom layouts, please?
Absolutely, yeah. So to switch from thumbnails to list, so this is thumbnail view here, this is list view here. So we just simply click into list view, just exactly the same as it is in the edit page. And actually, a lot of what we've just been doing, we can actually do in the edit page directly anyway. We can actually add metadata, for example. We can create smart bins all in the edit page. So it's not just in the media page. But this is your list view here. And then if you want to customize the column views, if you simply right click on any of the column headings, so in this case, any of these column headings here, if I right click on them, this will bring up this list here so that I can choose to see what I want to see. So for example, maybe I don't need end time code. There we go. And you can see it removes it from the list. And then if you want to save that, you can then choose to create a column layout here. So then you can give that, and you can give that a name so that you know the type of information that it's showing you. So you might want just, sort of codec information or format information rather than keywords.
Hey,
Okay.
Chris, There was another question. Can you rearrange the columns?
Yes, yes. You can rearrange the columns if you drag the column heading. So if you click on the column heading, you can then drag that. You can see I'm picking up a ghost here, and you can drop that in another location. Let me try that again. Yes, so we drop that in that location. So I've now changed the duration. So the duration is now next to the clip name. I could switch that with the keyword, for example, so that I could have that as my most dominant piece of information. This is particularly important when you get to something like the edit page, where, you know, to actually see all of the information across the media pool can be quite daunting. You have to scroll across because it doesn't necessarily give you the sort of the full across, the full width of the media pool for this. But yes, you can just simply click on the column heading and you drag that to between the columns that you actually want. And then again, you can save that as part of your preset as well, I believe.
Great, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So that was your lesson 3 in your book, organizing a new project. So we talked about creating a project, configuring essential settings, making sure ideally that the timeline resolutions are set correctly and the frame rate above all is set correctly. You can override that, as we'll look at in a second, at individual timeline levels. So even if you get it wrong at that initial creating of the project stage, it's not something that's completely irretrievable. You can always adjust it later on to do with the individual timelines. So, but it is worth knowing about right from the very beginning. We talked about working with bins, different viewing options, adding metadata, and working with smart bins, both automatic and custom smart bins. Finally, we just talked about customizing your bin views. So that was changing the columns and so forth, for example. We're just going to wrap up with this session today by just taking on the next lesson. And the next lesson is assembling a rough cut. So very similar to what we did earlier with the glass blowing exercise. We're just going to look at some of the editing functions that we've got, and actually just sort of building on this sort of drag and drop approach to editing, because it's all very well and good. It kind of takes us partway there, but really, in order to leverage the power of those professional editing tools, we need to look at all of the different editing functions that we've got. So we're going to look at working with the edit overlays and the toolbar edit buttons to access different editing functions. We're going to look at the J, K, and L controls. That's being able to control the playback of your video clips using keyboard shortcuts. So rather than clicking on buttons to play forwards and backwards and to jog and scrub back and forth. Using time code to be able to sort of jump forward a certain amount of time. We'll also be looking at working with video only edits, and also using different editing functions, including doing editing directly from the bin, so bypassing the source viewer, and also creating a replace edit as well. So there's quite a lot to do here, but actually it's relatively straightforward. And it's actually just building up confidence with how the software works and being aware of certain functions that you'll need to be aware of moving forward as we start to explore other things in tomorrow's session. So we're going to carry on with this project that we've been working on here. Don't worry if you've got the footage in the wrong smart bin or the wrong bin or something like that, or you haven't quite been following along exactly. It's not important at this stage because it's a relatively straightforward project. But what we will do is we will move from the media page back to the edit page. So let's click on the edit page here. And you can see that when we are back in the edit page, you can see that we've got access to all of our smart bins, all of our bins that we've been doing here. We've also got all of the changes that we made. If you change the name of a clip or edit a keyword and so forth. You've got access to all of those. If you need the metadata panel, you can open it here using the metadata. So that's the standard metadata panel that we were just looking at in the media page. So you can add further keywords to multiple clips if you need to. And you can also carry on by adding further smart bins here as well. So everything that we've just been talking about, except the media storage locations, really, you can actually do in the edit page directly. However, one of the things that we need the edit page for as well is to be able to edit. And the first thing we're going to do is actually create a timeline for this. So the best thing to work with timelines is to treat them almost as clips in their own right, if you like. So generally, most editors will create a bin just for your timelines. So that's the first thing we'll do. So right click in your main bin list to create a new bin. So this is not a smart bin. This is just a new regular bin. And let's just call this, we just call this rough cuts. Rough cuts. And you might have multiple versions of a timeline at different sections, at different parts of the edit as it starts to progress. Just to differentiate the rough cuts bin from all of the other bins, it can be useful to color code it. So in this case, if you right click the rough cuts bin, you can also apply something called a color tag. So in this case, let's color code this. I'm going to color code it blue because I think that's my favorite color. If you've got a different favorite color, you color code it your own favorite color. But you'll see now, I can actually color code my bins. So it's useful to sort of visually identify if there's an important bin or something. So if we select that rough cuts bin, and we need to create a new timeline for this. Now, in the previous project with the glass blowing lady, what we did was we just simply dragged and dropped a clip into the empty timeline window, and that actually generated a timeline for us. But in this case, we're going to manually create our own timeline just to have a little bit more control over it. So if we go to the File menu and choose New Timeline, this is with the rough cuts bin selected. That will create a new timeline for us. So here we've got, we can change the start time code, the number of video and audio tracks that we have by default. The audio track type is stereo by default. We'll explore this in more detail as we start working through the audio section of things. Really, at this stage, we can leave all of these settings alone. The only thing that we want to change is the timeline name. So let's just call this Age of Airplanes Rough Cut. Age of Airplanes Rough Cut. Now, many of you, particularly if you've been working with other nonlinear systems like Final Cut or Premiere, for example, might be asking, well, what are the timeline settings? Well, by default, you'll notice there's an option here. It says Use Project Settings. So whatever you've set in your project settings for your timeline, that's what this timeline will use automatically. Now remember, in the previous example with the glass blowing lady, a lot of that had already been set for us. So it might be useful to go back and compare what those project settings are to this project setting, but I'll let you do that in your own time. If you want to change from the project settings, so maybe you didn't change the frame rate, for example, or maybe you changed the resolution to something that was wrong, then you can actually override it when you create this timeline. So we can uncheck Use Project Settings, and now under Format, we can actually change the resolution and the frame rate for this timeline. If you are going to do this, do it before you edit anything into the timeline. So do it when you create the timeline, if this is what you want to do. But otherwise, if you've got your project settings correct, you don't need to change this. So in this case, we'll just check Use Project Settings again. And that's the basic timeline. So you know, if you know what your project settings are set to, you know what the timeline's created. And we're just going to choose to create in order to be able to create that timeline. Okay. So usually when you start editing something, it's a bit difficult to know where to start or anything like that. But it's useful to start with spoken words. So it's useful to start by piecing together interviews or dialogue for a scene, and then build things out around that. So that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to go to my interviews smart bin here. And here I've got 3 interview clips there. It's 01, 02, 03. If you just make sure that you are organizing these by clip name in ascending order, that would be great as well. If you haven't got your interview smart bin, just go back to your master bin and you can see the interview clips very clearly using the thumbnails anyway. So we want to take this clip here, 01, shoot the real world. So I'm going to double click to open that into the source viewer. Back to the beginning of this clip. I've got my waveform up still, so I'm still used to using that. But again, if you need to bring that waveform up, then you use your options menu at the top of your source viewer and choose show zoomed audio waveform. And in this case, what I want to do is I'm just going to play the clip from beginning to end. It's about 15, 16 seconds long, but I'm not just going to click the buttons here. Instead, I'm just going to use the space bar. So space bar will start and stop the playback.
Yeah. So in this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world and how the airplane is connecting and making all the things possible that I want to convey in the film.
Okay, so obviously we need to set in and out points around that. There's a little bit of noise in the background of this. Don't worry about that. We'll sort all of that out when we get to our Fairlight section. So let's just go back towards the beginning here, and I want to set an in point just before he starts to speak. So I'm going to press play again.
Yeah. So
that's where he's just about to speak. So in point just before he says,
in this film,
in this film. And then I want to set my out point where he says,
in this film, making a documentary about how the airplanes changed the world, it was really important to go out and shoot the real world.
Shoot the real world. And again, I can use my jog control and I can set my out point. Now, don't worry about that. I have a keynote slide if you missed all of that. So I could hear the panic emanating through the internet. So he's going too quick, he's going too quick. So for your first edit, the clip is 01, shoot the real world. The in point is just before he says, in this film. And the out point is after he said, shoot the real world. I shall give you about 20 to 25 seconds to be able to find that section and mark your in and out points. Okay. Hopefully most people should be fine with that. Now, having got that clip marked, what we want to do is we want to edit this into the timeline. Now we can pick it up and we can drag and drop it down into the timeline. We've done that before, no harm in that at all. However, another way of being able to edit is actually to take the clip and not drag it down to the timeline, but drag it across to the timeline viewer. And when you do that, you'll notice a set of overlays appear in the timeline viewer. And this actually gives us the different sorts of edits that we have inside Resolve. And you'll notice I don't actually have to drag it all the way to that menu that's slid over there, because one of those is set by default and it's called overwrite. And this is the default basic type of edit that we can do just by simply dropping the clip there. It will overwrite. There are actually a number of these, and I just want to point out that in your book on page 127, 127, there is actually a list of what each of these editing functions do, but it's actually easier to just sort of play around with them and experiment with what they do. But if we choose overwrite here and drop the clip, it'll actually drop it directly into the timeline for us. So that's the first clip in there. So click and drag from the source viewer here in the source viewer over the timeline viewer and just drop it in using the overwrite edit. Okay, let's go to clip interview clip 02 if it was possible to shoot it. So double click to open it up, bring the playhead back to the beginning. Now, one of the things that we've been doing is going forwards and backwards over a clip and jogging backwards and forwards. And you can do all of that using 3 keys on your keyboard. They are J, K, and L. So J, K, and L. If you press L,
7 continents, 18 countries, it was very important that everything was real. If it was possible to shoot
forwards. If you press K, it pauses. And if you press J, it plays in reverse. So L
if it was possible to
forwards,
shoot it,
J backwards, and K pause. If you tap L or J more than once, then you will shuttle. This means move quicker. So little value appears on the right-hand side of these transport controls. Let me just dim my output here.
if it was possible to shoot it,
I'm playing back normal speed. Now I'm playing back twice normal speed, 4 times. Now I've run out of footage, but I've just tapped L 3 times there in quick succession. There you go. You can move up to 16 times normal speed. You can go faster in the cut page, but that's for a later date. Also, if you want to jog forwards and backwards, you can use the left and right arrow keys to do 1 frame at a time. But if you hold down the K key, usually with the middle finger of your less dominant hand, so if you're right-handed, go with the left hand, hold down the K key and then tap the L or the J key. That means you're actually jogging forward 1 frame at a time. And you can actually hold that down, K, and then hold down L or J in order to be able to scrub slowly back and forward. So this is the same as this control here. So what are we looking for? Well, if I just go back here, we're looking for an endpoint that says, if it was possible.
7 continents, 18 countries, it was very important that everything was real. If it was possible to do it,
and then just turn on my scrubbing. If
it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original and that everything was real. But
out. So again, don't worry. So using your J, K, and L keys, again, I could feel the panic emanating from people. It's going too quick, it's going too quick. Using your J, K, and L keys takes a bit of practice, but it is well worth it, trust me. So using your J, K, and L keys on clip 02, if it was possible, set the in point just before he says, if it was possible to shoot. If you can try and get it after the R, well done. If it was possible to shoot it. And the out point, everything, every shot was original and every shot was real. Okay, so every shot was real is your out point. I shall give you 30 to 40 seconds in order to be able to set your in and out points. Okay. Hopefully everyone is there with that. So I shall just hide that. And now we need to perform an overwrite edit again. Now, the trick about this is to understand that the overwrite edit, as with most of these edits, uses the playhead position in the timeline to actually choose where that edit should be. So in this case, just make sure that your playhead is at the end of that clip. If you've moved the playhead here, for example, then that means that you'll make the edit partway through that clip. So just make sure that the playhead is at the end of the timeline there. And another way that you can make an overwrite edit rather than dragging the clip to the timeline viewer is actually using one of these three buttons here at the top of the timeline. It's this middle button, overwrite clip. The keyboard shortcut is F10. If you're on a Mac and you press the F10 and it doesn't actually make an overwrite edit, you might just need to go into your system preferences and just change your keyboard settings to use all of the F keys, the standard F keys. Or alternatively, if you're on a Mac, just hold down the FN key on your keyboard and then tap the F10 and that should work. On a PC, you shouldn't have any problems at all, I don't think. But in this case, if I just press the F10 key, that will actually make that edit there on the timeline. And I'm actually going to go into my full extent zoom here so that I can see my edit as I'm building it up. If you just press the up arrow key as well on your timeline, now you'll actually see the up and down arrows allow me to jump between different edit points. So I want to move the playhead to the edit point between those two interview clips. And then if you press the / key on your keyboard,
Shoot the real world. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot.
I'll press that again, the / key.
Shoot the real world. If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot.
And what that just does is it just previews around about 4 or 5 seconds of the timeline and then returns the playhead back to the original starting point. This is a good way of just being able to review and edit. And in this case, it's fine, but what we have is we have what we call a jump cut. We're going from an interview to an interview. We can't really have that. What we want to do is we want to put in a piece of B-roll in the middle there. So let's go to our B-roll bin and let's find some appropriate footage. This St. Martin shot's quite nice here. So let's double click to open up the St. Martin landing shot. Find the point in this clip, and again, you can use your J, K, and L keys for all of this. Find the point of the clip where the plane is about sort of in the middle of the frame. That's your in point, and then set your out point just as the tail of the plane has left frame. So in point when the plane is around about sort of halfway into the frame. So, you know, just as you can sort of see it become almost about halfway into the shot, really. So that you can see it's definitely a plane. And the out point just after the plane has left frame. There's no audio with this shot, by the way, if you were wondering. You can see that the waveform isn't there. Now, here's something that we can't do by simply dragging and dropping to the timeline. If we take this clip and we drag it across here, we can actually choose something called an insert edit. So if we choose insert, and you can see how it's actually now split those two clips and inserted this new shot in. If you were to simply drag that down to the timeline, it would actually overwrite one side or other of the edit, which we don't want in this case. The insert is actually quite useful as well because you can actually insert to break up a clip. If I play in this timeline here, if I play this second interview clip.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie. It was really important. Every shot was original. And
so that last line, it was really important. Would be nice if there was a little bit of a break, a little bit of thought, and then we could pick up on that to almost finish on that.
it didn't make the movie.
So didn't make the movie. And that's where I'm going to place my playhead. So I'm going to play that interview clip until he says, didn't make the movie, stop the playhead there. And I'm just going to open up my audio waveforms a little bit more so I can see them clearly. Okay, so now I've found the start for my next edit. I'm going to go back to my B-roll bin, find this clip here, A380 takeoff. Double click to open that up into the source viewer. I'm going to set an in point just before the wheels lift off the ground there. Yeah, so somewhere about there. And the out point once the plane has left frame is there. And again, I'm going to do an insert here, but rather than drag and drop using the overlays, I've got an insert button here at the top of the timeline. So insert clip, F9, if you want to use your keyboard shortcuts. So F9 will insert that, and you'll notice how it splits the interview clip. Feel free at any point to go and watch what you've just done in terms of the edit on the timeline. But then once you've done that, just make sure that you return your playhead to the edit point between the takeoff shot and the last interview clip, so the end of the takeoff shot. And again, you can use your up and down arrows to quickly navigate there in the timeline. Next shot we want to work on is this clip here called Bay Area Lights. So this is a time-lapse shot. Sometimes it's quite useful to, you don't quite know which part of the shot to use. So you might just sort of think, well, we could use any part really. But a technique that I've often done is, sometimes you just need about 3 seconds of a shot. So if you move to just as the shot darkens, so it's about a sort of a fifth of the way into the shot there, so that we get rid of that sort of sunset. If you set an in point there, it doesn't matter where this is, really. Then what we want to jump the playhead forward by 3 seconds. So little trick to this, if you tap plus on your keyboard, you'll see here in the time code window it says plus, and now you can type in a time code value. So if you type in 300, that actually becomes 3 seconds. So it means 3 seconds from where we currently are. So plus 300, hit the return key, and then set your out point. And then again, make an insert edit. So here's a useful little edit as well that we can use to sort of build up on this a little bit more. If you move the playhead back to the end of this previous long interview here, it's still quite long. So if we move the playhead back to there, currently I'm on the first frame of the takeoff shot. I want to be on the last frame of the interview for this. So here you can see here I've got an in point symbol, meaning that I'm actually on the beginning of this shot. So if you use the left arrow key now, you will come back one more frame. This means that you're on the last frame of this clip. So if I set an out point here, I'm setting an out point on the timeline because I want to set the duration on the timeline to edit a clip precisely on the timeline where I want it to be. So if I set an out point on the timeline and then type in this case, -300, you'll now see that I've got -300 in my timecode window in my timeline viewer. Hit the return key, press the in point. I've now marked a section of the timeline. So this is how useful it can be sometimes to just set in and out points directly on the timeline, because that is where I know that I want to edit the next shot. And in this case, the shot that I want is this aerial close-up here. So 05 aerial Alaska here. So let's open that into the source. Again, you could pretty much take any part of this. So if I set an in point around about sort of halfway through the shot, now, I don't need an out point for this because I've actually got the in and the out point here on the timeline. So what will happen here is it will actually match the in point in the source with the in point in the timeline. Now, if I do an overwrite edit, by default, it will actually overwrite the video portion of this clip, which is not too bad, but normally we would put cutaways on a track above. So in this case, we're going to take the clip here, we're going to drag it across here, and we're going to use something called place on top. Again, I'll just alter the height of those video clips just by simply clicking, holding shift and using the scroll on my mouse. Again, if I just come back and just play a section of that timeline.
Right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie.
We're going to do something similar, but this time we're going to actually use the beginning part of that interview here. So we're going to set an in and an out point over this beginning part of the interview. So back the playhead up to the edit point at the beginning of the middle interview clip. Set an in point. And I'm just going to play forward from there now.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get it,
if it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. Out. And the shot we're going to use for this is actually clip 04, jet landing. So double click to open that up. Now, straight away, you should notice the waveform at the bottom of the clip. This, of course, indicates that there's audio on this clip. Set an in point just as you see the wheels start to come into shot, probably as the wheels are fully in shot, something like that. That's where you want to set your in point. Now, here's the issue with this. Because I've got picture and sound within the same clip, if I take this clip and drag it across here and choose my place on top, it also brings in the audio into the timeline as well. And you can see how it's actually placed the audio underneath there. And actually the audio is not appropriate for this. I don't want to use the audio. So I'm just going to press Command Z, Control Z on the PC, of course, to undo. So how can I edit with just the picture? Well, I can actually just take this here and I can actually, excuse me, try that again. Actually take this, drag across here using just the picture overlay. Remember, we used the audio overlay in the previous lesson. Drag the picture overlay across and choose place on top. That works. However, if you're using a function other than something like this, where you've got the overlays, maybe you want to use the keyboard shortcuts. So here under the edit, here, under the edit menu, you will notice that we've got place on top as a editing function, and we have a keyboard shortcut of F12. Now, the problem with this is that if I'm using a keyboard shortcut, or if I'm using any of these buttons here in the timeline, I can't specify which overlay I'm using. The overlays will only work if I'm picking a clip up and moving it either directly to the timeline or directly to the timeline viewer. So another way that we've got of making sure that we just edit with the appropriate video or audio part of the timeline is we've got a pair of destination controls here. So this V1 with a red box tells me that I will edit the video clip, and the audio one with a red box tells me I will also edit the audio clip into the timeline. And how this works is, if I just undo that last edit I've just made, is that, remember, if I just use F12, it will edit the picture and the sound in. But if I turn off A1 with a red box, that actually disables audio from entering the timeline. So again, if I press F12, I now don't get the audio, but I do get the video. I know, sounds like a very long-winded, but why don't I just click the overlay and drag it? That's fine, but sometimes you just want to use a keyboard shortcut because it's just easier and quicker. But these are just different ways that we've got of making sure that we're editing the correct portions of the clips into the timeline. 2 more edits to do, and then we are pretty much clear for today. So with this one here, what we're going to do is we're just going to take a couple of clips and we just want to edit them onto the end of the timeline. So in this case, we're going to take the taxi clip here and select that. And we're also going to select this clip here called Night Takeoff, 08 Night Takeoff. So I'm going to select that as well. So I'm selecting 2 clips. So Command or Control click both of those. And with both of them selected, remember we did this in the previous example where we edited the clips in and they put it in the same order that I had them listed. I can now take these clips, drag them directly over to the timeline viewer. So I'm bypassing the source viewer completely, and I can use this function here. This is append at end. And append at end is really useful because it doesn't matter where my playhead is. It doesn't matter where it is in the timeline. When I drop on append at end, it will always edit them to the end of that timeline. And again, you will notice that because my audio one was turned off, none of the audio for either of these 2 clips, it's only the taxi one that had audio, has actually entered the timeline. So again, another bonus there for making sure that my audio track targeting is off here. last edit to work on now. And it's actually a special sort of edit. It's very, very useful, actually. And it is, if we move the playhead over this jet shot here, and I'm just going to find a point just as the engines are all in shot. Just find the frame where all of the engines are in shot. And again, you can use the zoom, the detail zoom, in order to be able to find that in the timeline. And the shot that we want here is the Maldives clip, 09 Maldives. Double click to open that up. And if you find within that clip, around about the point where the plane is entering the frame, but it's probably about halfway in. So if you find the point just as the plane is about halfway in. And what we want to do with this is we actually want to replace the jet shot with this shot. But the problem is here, is it's all to do with your track targeting again. So we're going to use a replace edit. And a replace edit actually uses the two playhead positions. So it takes the playhead in the source and places it in the timeline at the playhead position. The problem is with this, because we've got it on this second video track, what we need to do here is we need to change this V1 in a box here. So we need to bring it up to video 2. That then targets this track. If we didn't do that, we would be targeting the clip on video 1, which is this, and it would try and replace this shot. So we don't want to do that. We want to do this, make sure the V1 in a box is next to the video 2 track. And then you can either drag across to here and choose replace, or alternatively, you can use your replace edit button here, F11, and that will replace the whole shot.
If it was possible to shoot it, we wanted to go shoot it. If we couldn't get the shot or the weather wasn't right, we would either go back to that location, stay at that location longer, or it didn't make the movie.
Excellent. Cool. How did we do? We're 10 minutes late. I apologize. Sherwin and Diego can tell you by now, I was never one for keeping to deadlines. Yes. So sorry about that, but we're a few minutes late. But I hope you bore with me on that. So that is really just the end of this is lesson 4 in your book, and it's assembling a rough cut into the timeline. Yes, you can use drag and drop like we used in the first exercise, but this gives you the precise control that you need by setting in and out points, whether it's in and outs in the source or whether it's in and outs in the timeline. This is how a lot of times we end up piecing footage together like this. Sho and Diego, is there anything that we might need to just spend a few minutes just going over, or should we let these good people return to the rest of their lives, or at least until tomorrow?
I think we're good. We'll stay on for a few minutes to answer questions through the Q&A panel and through the chat. But yeah, I think we're good to cut it for the day.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you very much, guys. Yes, that is the end of our session. Just very quickly, just to review that. So yeah, we used edit overlay and toolbar edit buttons. So this was exploring all of the different sorts of edits that we've got, using JK&L to control the playback, using time code numbers to be able to jump back and forth both in your timeline and in your source. Video only edits and track targeting. Editing directly from the bin, and also using, of course, magic replace edit just at the very end. So thank you very much. I hope you found this session useful. We'd like to end it there for today, if that's okay. My keynote will actually stop on that slide. We will be here again same time tomorrow. We'll be running the second session, and we'll actually pick it up with lesson 5 in the book, which is actually moving clips around and reorganizing a timeline. So we'll spend another day doing edit page stuff before moving on to color on Wednesday. So hopefully I shall see you here same time tomorrow. Thanks very much. All the best.